You thought you were choosing a life of peace and prayer. Instead, you're bleeding into a wooden bowl at 4 a.m., carving letters into parchment until your fingers crack and bleed. The monastery bell hasn't stopped ringing for what feels like days, calling you to another hour of mandatory worship. Your stomach gnaws with hunger because yesterday was a fasting day, and today, well, today is another fasting day. Welcome to medieval monastery life, where salvation comes with a price no one warned you about. The decision to become a monk seemed so clear when you made it 6 months ago. The world outside these stone walls had grown too harsh, too uncertain, too filled with violence and corruption. You'd heard stories of monasteries as havens of learning, places where men devoted themselves to God and found peace in contemplation and prayer. The recruiting brothers who visited your village painted pictures of communities where scholars preserved ancient wisdom, where the hungry were fed, where souls found rest. What they didn't mention were the screams. You're hearing them now, echoing through the stone corridors at this ungodly hour before dawn. Brother Marcus, 3 cells down from yours, is having another episode. The copying work has finally broken him. Too many years hunched over manuscripts, too many hours straining his eyes in candlelight, too many days of malnutrition that's left his mind as fragile as his body. His screams aren't words anymore, just raw animal sounds that speak to something primal and terrified. No one goes to help him. This is the 3rd time this month, and everyone knows the routine. By morning, 2 of the stronger brothers will carry him to the infirmary, where Brother Benedict will dose him with poppy extract until he stops making noise. If he's lucky, he'll recover enough to return to copying work within a week. If not, well, the monastery cemetery has added 3 new graves this year already. You pull your thin woolen blanket tighter around your shoulders and try to ignore the cold seeping through the stone walls of your cell. The space is barely large enough for your straw mattress and the wooden cross hanging on the wall. There's no window, no source of heat, no comfort beyond what your own body can generate. In winter, frost forms on the inside walls, and you've learned to sleep curled, so tightly that your spine aches for hours after rising. The bell that woke you, the same bell that will wake you every day for the rest of your life, continues its relentless tolling. Matins, the first of 8 daily prayer services that structure monastic life like the bars of a prison. In a few minutes, you'll join 40 other men in the monastery church, standing in darkness and cold while chanting Latin prayers that most of you only half understand. But first, you have to deal with your hands. The copying work has left them in worse condition than a laborer's. The constant gripping of quills has created permanent calluses on your fingers. The ink stains have seeped so deep into your skin that no amount of washing can remove them. Worst of all are the cuts. Small nicks from sharpening quill points, deeper gashes from the metal tools used to scrape parchment clean, and the constant cracking around your knuckles from cold and dryness. You lift your hands toward the small oil lamp that provides the cell's only light, examining the damage from yesterday's work. The index finger of your right hand has opened again, a thin line of blood marking where the skin split while you gripped your writing tool. It's been healing and reopening for weeks now, never quite getting enough rest to fully mend. This is your life now. This is the peace and contemplation you sought. The screaming from Brother Marcus's cell has stopped, but the silence that follows is somehow worse. You know he's either unconscious from exhaustion or dead. Either way, there will be copying work to redistribute tomorrow, and your daily quota will increase to cover his absence. You close your eyes and try to remember why you came here. There was something about serving God, about finding meaning in a chaotic world, about joining a community of like-minded souls seeking spiritual truth. Those motivations seem as distant now as your former life. Faded memories from a time when you still had enough flesh on your bones to generate heat and enough naivety to believe that suffering purified the soul. The bell tolls again, more insistently. Time to get up. Time to dress in the coarse brown habit that chafes your skin raw. Time to walk through corridors so cold your breath mists in front of your face. Time to kneel on stone floors that will leave your knees swollen and aching. Time to begin another day in this place where God's love is measured by how much pain you can endure without complaint. Welcome to medieval monastic life. It's going to be a very long day. Brother Augustine strikes the wooden clapper against the monastery bell with mechanical precision, calling the community to matins as he has every morning for the past 15 years. His movements are economical, practiced, showing no sign of the tuberculosis that will kill him within 6 months. In monastic life, you work until you die. There are no retirement plans for servants of God. The rule of Saint Benedict governs every aspect of your existence here at the monastery of Saint Bartholomew. Written nearly 600 years ago by a man who probably never imagined the brutal realities of its daily implementation, the rule divides each day into precise segments. 8 hours for prayer, 8 hours for manual labor, 8 hours for sleep and meals. What Benedict didn't account for was how those hours would feel when stretched across decades of identical days, or how the human body would respond to such rigid scheduling combined with inadequate nutrition and harsh living conditions. You stumble from your cell into the corridor, joining the silent procession of your brothers as they make their way toward the church. The stone floor is so cold it burns through the thin soles of your sandals. Your breath creates small clouds in the frigid air. Around you, 40 men move like ghosts, their faces drawn with exhaustion and hunger, their movements careful and controlled despite the early hour. Brother Thomas, walking just ahead of you, sways slightly as he moves. He's been showing signs of what you've come to recognize as advanced malnutrition. The glassy stare, the trembling hands, the way he sometimes forgets where he is mid-conversation. The monastery's infirmarian, Brother Benedict, has been dosing him with herbal concoctions, but everyone knows it's only a matter of time. Thomas will either collapse during prayer services or simply fail to wake up one morning. The church is a cavern of shadows when you enter, lit only by a handful of candles that create more atmosphere than actual illumination. The stone walls rise into darkness above you, and your footsteps echo despite your efforts to move quietly. You take your assigned place in the choir stalls, wooden seats worn smooth by generations of monks, and wait for the service to begin. Abbot Geoffrey enters last, his presence immediately transforming the scattered gathering into a formal religious assembly. At 63, he survived longer than most men in monastic life, though the cost is evident in his stooped shoulders and the way he moves carefully to protect joints swollen with arthritis. His face, illuminated by candlelight, shows the particular gauntness that comes from decades of fasting and self-denial. In Nomen Patris, at Filii, at Spiritus Sancti, he begins, his voice carrying clearly through the cold air. Amen. 40 voices respond in unison, and so begins another day in paradise. The Latin psalms flow around you like water, beautiful and incomprehensible in equal measure. You learned enough Latin during your novitiate to understand perhaps half of what you're chanting, but the meaning has become irrelevant. These words are rhythms now, sounds that mark time and provide structure to days that would otherwise blend into an endless nightmare of repetition. Psalm 95, Venita, Exultamus, Domino. Come, let us rejoice in the Lord. The irony would be amusing if you had energy left for humor. Rejoicing seems impossible when your empty stomach cramps with hunger and your feet have gone numb from standing on cold stone. You notice Brother Francis, standing 2 places to your left, swaying more than usual. His face has the waxy pallor that often precedes collapse, and his voice is barely audible during the responses. This is his first winter in the monastery, and his body hasn't yet adapted to the combination of cold, hunger, and exhaustion that defines monastic life. He probably won't survive until spring. The service continues for what feels like hours, but is probably only 90 minutes. Psalm follows psalm, prayer follows prayer, and your legs begin to ache from prolonged standing. The cold seeps through your woolen habit and into your bones, making your joints stiff and painful. Around you, men shift their weight from foot to foot, trying to maintain circulation while appearing appropriately reverent. Brother Marcus is absent from the service. Either he's recovered enough to be confined to his cell, or his body is being prepared for burial. In monastic life, you learn not to ask such questions. Death is as common as prayer, and often more merciful. Finally, mercifully, Abbot Geoffrey raises his hand for the concluding blessing. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus. May Almighty God bless you. The familiar words wash over you as you prepare for dismissal and the brief respite before Lauds, the second prayer service of the day. But there is no rest for the scribes. As the community files out of the church, Brother Joachim, the monastery's scriptorium master, catches your eye with a gesture. You're one of 8 monks assigned full-time to copying work, which means your day begins earlier and ends later than the others. While your brothers return to their cells for an hour of contemplation before dawn, you head directly to the scriptorium to begin the work that will consume the next 12 hours of your life. The scriptorium is arguably the most important room in the monastery, though it's also the most punishing place to work. This is where the crucial task of preserving and copying manuscripts takes place, the work that justifies the monastery's existence and provides its primary source of income. Without the revenue from selling copies of religious texts, medical treatises, and classical works, the community couldn't survive. Your bleeding fingers and failing eyesight are literally keeping the monastery alive. Brother Joachim is already at work when you arrive, hunched over a particularly valuable manuscript that requires his expertise to copy correctly. He's been in charge of the scriptorium for 12 years, and the work has left him with a permanently curved spine and hands, so crippled by arthritis that he can barely hold a quill. He'll continue working until he dies, because the monastery can't afford to lose his knowledge, and he can't afford to stop earning his keep. The Psalter needs to be finished by Vespers, he tells you without looking up from his work. The Bishop of Winchester's secretary will collect it tomorrow, and he's not known for patience with delays. You nod and take your place at the copying desk that has become as familiar as your own cell. The wooden surface is stained with ink and scored with knife marks from years of manuscript preparation. Your tools are laid out exactly as you left them yesterday. Quills in various stages of sharpening, pots of ink in black and brown, a sharp knife for scraping errors from parchment, and a ruler for keeping lines straight. The manuscript you're copying is a psalter, a book of psalms intended for use by wealthy lay people who want to demonstrate their piety. It's beautiful work, requiring not just accurate copying, but decorative illumination around important letters and sections. The parchment is expensive vellum, made from cowskin and prepared with painstaking care. A single significant error could ruin sheets worth more than most people earn in a year. You light your oil lamp and adjust its position to provide the best possible illumination for close work. The scriptorium has windows, but they're small and positioned high in the walls to prevent distractions. Most of your copying will be done by lamplight, which means constant eye strain and the ever-present risk of accidentally setting something on fire. Brother Joachim has strict rules about fire safety in the scriptorium. 2 years ago, Brother Peter fell asleep at his copying desk and knocked over an oil lamp. The resulting fire destroyed 3 completed manuscripts, damaged several others, and nearly burned down the entire building. Peter was punished with a month of bread and water followed by reassignment to the monastery's farm work. He died the following winter, his body unable to handle outdoor labor after years of sedentary copying work. You pick up your quill and examine its point. The tip needs resharpening, which means using the small knife to carefully slice away tiny slivers of the hollow shaft until you achieve the right angle and flexibility. It's delicate work that requires steady hands and good light. A poorly cut quill will create thick, irregular lines that make text difficult to read and reduce the manuscript's value. The first letter of the morning's work is a large decorated D that begins the psalm, Domini, quid multiplicati sunt. Lord, how my enemies have multiplied. The irony isn't lost on you. Surrounded by brothers in Christ, you often feel like your enemies have indeed multiplied. There's Brother Joachim, whose impossible standards make every day a trial. There's Brother Benedict, the infirmarian, whose treatments often seem designed more to satisfy his sadistic impulses than to heal the sick. There's Abbot Geoffrey, whose interpretation of holy poverty seems to apply only to the monks under his authority, while he dines with visiting dignitaries and sleeps in a heated chamber. But these thoughts are dangerous. The monastery has ways of dealing with brothers who express doubt or dissatisfaction. The mildest punishment is increased fasting, but persistent troublemakers can find themselves assigned to the most brutal manual labor, or, worst of all, expelled from the community to face starvation in the outside world. You focus on your work, carefully outlining the decorative letter with your newly sharpened quill. The illumination requires precise control of ink flow and absolute steadiness of hand. Any tremor or hesitation will show in the finished work, reducing its quality and potentially costing the monastery valuable revenue. The ink flows smoothly from your quill, creating clean, dark lines on the pale vellum. This particular manuscript uses only black ink for the text, with red reserved for important initials and section markers. More elaborate works might include gold leaf, blue and green pigments, and complex decorativitors. But those commissions are rare and usually handled by Brother Joachim himself. As you work, you become aware of the rhythm that governs scriptorium life. The scratching of quills on parchment provides a constant background sound, occasionally interrupted by the scraping of knives as brothers correct errors or prepare new quill points. Brother Joachim moves between the copying desks, checking work and offering corrections in whispered Latin phrases. The oil lamps flicker and smoke, requiring constant adjustment to maintain proper lighting. Outside the scriptorium windows, you can hear the sounds of the monastery's other activities beginning. Brother Augustine rings the bell for lauds, the second prayer service of the day. Voices drift up from the kitchen as the cooks begin preparing the day's simple meals. Somewhere in the distance, the farm workers are beginning their daily labor in the monastery's fields and workshops, but you won't participate in most of these activities. Your life is confined to this room, bent over manuscripts, slowly going, blind and developing the hunched posture that marks experienced scribes. This is your contribution to the monastery's mission, your service to God, your path to salvation. By the time you finish the decorative D and copied the first few lines of text, your back is already aching from hunching over the manuscript. Your eyes water from the strain of working by lamplight. Your right hand has developed a familiar cramping sensation that will worsen as the day progresses. This is just the beginning. You have 11 more hours of copying ahead of you, with brief breaks only for prayer services and the day's single meal. The Psalter needs to be completed by evening, and there's no room for delays or excuses. Welcome to the contemplative life. Paradise has never felt so much like purgatory. Brother Joachim appears at your shoulder just as you're struggling with a particularly complex passage of Latin text. The Psalter you're copying contains numerous abbreviations and scribble. Contractions that save space on expensive parchment but make the copyist's job infinitely more difficult. One wrong interpretation could change the meaning of an entire psalm, creating heretical content that could damn both you and anyone who reads your work. That's sanctification, not sanctificati, he whispers, pointing to a word you've been puzzling over for several minutes. The scribe who copied the exemplar was careless with his abbreviations. You nod gratefully and carefully scrape away the incorrect letters with your knife. The process of correction is almost as skilled as the initial copying. You must remove the unwanted ink without damaging the underlying parchment. Then smooth the surface so that new text can be written cleanly. Too much pressure will create a hole in the vellum. Too little will leave ink stains that show through subsequent writing. The knife slips slightly, and you feel a sharp pain in your index finger. Looking down, you see a thin line of blood welling up from a fresh cut. It's the third time this week that your tools have drawn blood, a combination of fatigue making your hands unsteady and the constant repetitive motions causing calluses to crack and split. Careful, Brother Joachim murmurs. Blood on the manuscript ruins everything. You quickly press your finger against your woolen habit to stop the bleeding, then return to your correction work. The cut isn't deep, but it adds to the collection of small wounds that mark the hands of every scribe in the monastery. Brother William, who's been copying manuscripts for 20 years, has hands so scarred and calloused that they barely look human anymore. The correction completed, you continue with the psalm text. The Latin flows under your quill in careful, measured strokes. Domini, quid multiplicati sunt qui tribulant me, multi insurgent adversam me. Lord, how my enemies have multiplied. Many rise up against me. The irony of copying these words while surrounded by the daily antagonisms of monastic life isn't lost on you. The work requires absolute concentration. Medieval scribes don't simply copy letter by letter. You must understand the text well enough to recognize words, even when they're abbreviated or written in unfamiliar scripts. The exemplar you're working from was copied by at least 3 different hands, each with their own style of abbreviation and letter formation. What looks like VNI in one section might be Deus, God, or Domini, Lord, depending on the context. Brother Francis, the young monk you notice swaying during matins, is working 2 desks away from you. His copying assignment is simpler than yours, a basic prayer book that doesn't require illumination. But even this straightforward work is proving challenging for him. You can see his hands trembling as he tries to form letters, and his normally neat script has become increasingly irregular as fatigue and hunger take their toll. The monastery's approach to training new scribes is brutally practical. Young brothers are assigned to copying work immediately after completing their novitiate, regardless of their previous experience with writing. Those who adapt quickly become valuable assets to the community. Those who struggle are quietly reassigned to other duties, or, if they prove completely unsuitable, encouraged to leave monastic life entirely. Brother Francis is clearly struggling. His letters are uneven, his spacing irregular, and you can see several places where he's had to scrape away errors and start again. Each correction weakens the parchment and reduces the manuscript's value. Too many errors will result in punishment, anything from extra fasting to assignment to the monasteries. Most unpleasant manual labor. Focus on your own work, Brother Joachim warns you quietly, noticing your attention drifting toward Francis. Charity begins with fulfilling your own obligations. You return your attention to the Psalter, but the interruption has cost you several minutes of copying time. The decorative border around this particular psalm is complex, requiring careful measurement and precise execution. The original manuscript includes intricate vine scrolls and small animals hidden among the foliage, details that must be reproduced exactly in your copy. The physical demands of illumination work are even greater than regular text copying. Creating. The decorative elements requires different tools, different inks, and different techniques. Your hands must be absolutely steady. Your eyes must focus on minute details. And your understanding of artistic principles must be sophisticated enough to recreate complex designs. You begin outlining the vine scrolls with a thin quill, using diluted ink to create guidelines that can later be painted over with full-strength pigment. The work is hypnotically detailed. Each leaf must be shaped correctly. Each tendril must curve naturally. Each junction must connect smoothly with the overall design. As you work, you become aware of Brother Francis's increasing distress. His breathing has become labored, and you can see sweat on his forehead despite the cold temperature in the scriptorium. The combination of hunger, exhaustion, and stress is pushing him toward collapse. There's nothing you can do to help without attracting Brother Joachim's attention and potentially sharing his punishment. Monastic. Life teaches harsh lessons about individual responsibility and the limits of brotherly love. Helping a struggling colleague might seem charitable, but it also enables weakness and undermines the community's discipline. Every brother must learn to bear his own burdens or face the consequences of failure. The vine scroll emerges slowly. Under your quill, each element carefully positioned according to the original design. The work is genuinely beautiful. Medieval manuscript illumination represents one of the highest artistic achievements of the age, but the beauty comes at an enormous cost in human suffering. Every decorated letter represents hours of meticulous labor by scribes whose health and vision are being slowly destroyed by their work. You pause to rest your hand and examine your progress. The morning's work has produced about half a page of completed text and illumination, a reasonable pace, but one that will require absolute consistency throughout the day if you're to finish the Psalter by evening. There can be no significant breaks, no time lost to illness or fatigue, no moments of inattention that might result in costly errors. Brother Francis suddenly makes a small sound of distress. Looking over, you see that his quill is slipped, creating a large ink blot in the middle of a prayer. The error is serious enough to require scraping away a significant portion of text and starting that section over again. In his weakened condition, the additional work might be more than he can handle. Brother Joachim appears immediately, drawn by some sixth sense that alerts him to problems in his domain. He examines Francis's work with the expression of a man calculating financial losses. How did this happen? He asks quietly. My hand slipped, brother, Francis whispers. I can fix it. I can scrape it clean and start again. Yes, you can, Joachim agrees. And you will. But first, you'll spend the rest of today without food. Perhaps hunger will help you concentrate on your work. It's a cruel irony. Francis's error was almost certainly caused by the weakness that comes from inadequate nutrition, and his punishment will make that weakness worse. But monastic logic operates on different principles than human compassion. Suffering purifies the soul, and error indicates insufficient spiritual discipline. You return your attention to your own work, knowing that Francis's fate could easily become your own. Every quill stroke is a gamble, every line an opportunity for error that could result in punishment or, worse, assignment to duties that would end your usefulness to the community. The decorated psalm slowly takes shape under your hands. Text and illumination combine to create a work of art that will be treasured by its eventual owner and preserved for generations. But the human cost of this preservation is carefully hidden from those who commission and purchase these manuscripts. They see only the beauty, not the blood that marks the parchment, or the lives that are consumed in their creation. As the morning progresses toward the bell that will call the community to sext, the midday prayer service, you realize that you're approaching a crucial decision point in your monastic career. You can continue this work, slowly destroying your health and vision in service to preserving medieval learning. Or you can find a way to escape, either to other duties within the monastery or, more dangerously, to life outside these walls. But, for now, there's only the next line of text, the next decorative element, the next small step toward completing work that will outlive you by centuries while consuming your life day by day. The quill scratches against vellum, and another word appears in careful black letters: Misericordia, mercy. You could use some of that yourself. The bell for sex rings, just as you're completing a particularly intricate section of illuminated border work. Your back screams in protest as you straighten up from the hunched position you've maintained for the past 4 hours. Around you, the other scribes are also rising from their desks, moving with the careful, deliberate motions of men whose bodies have been pushed to their limits. Brother Francis doesn't get up. He's slumped over his copying desk, either unconscious or too weak to respond to the call to prayer. The ink blot that earned him Brother Joachim's punishment has been partially corrected, but his handwriting has deteriorated throughout the morning until the most recent lines are barely legible. Brother Joachim approaches Francis's desk and examines the situation with clinical detachment. Brother William, help me get into the infirmary, he says quietly. The rest of you, go to prayer. We'll discuss work assignments when you return. You join the procession of scribes filing out of the scriptorium, your legs unsteady after hours of sitting. The short walk to the church provides a brief respite from close work, allowing your eyes to focus on distant objects and your spine to decompress slightly. But you know the relief is temporary. After sext, you'll return to the copying desk for another 6 hours of identical labor. The church is warmer than the scriptorium, heated slightly by the presence of 40 men gathered for prayer. You take your place in the choir stalls, grateful for the few minutes of standing that will help restore circulation to your legs. Around you, the community assembles with the practiced efficiency of men who have performed this routine thousands of times. Brother Francis's empty place in the choir is a reminder of how quickly monastic life can change. This morning, he was a functioning member of the community, struggling but still contributing to the monastery's work. Now he's either in the infirmary fighting for his life or already being prepared for burial. The transition from useful brother to liability happens with startling speed in a community that operates on such narrow margins of survival. Abbot Geoffrey begins the midday service with the same Latin phrases that have opened thousands of previous sex services. Latin phrases that have opened thousands of previous sex services. The familiar rhythms provide structure to days that would otherwise blur together in endless repetition. But they also underscore the mechanical nature of monastic routine. Prayer becomes as automatic as breathing. Words lose their meaning through constant repetition, and spiritual exercises become physical endurance tests. You notice several empty places in the choir stalls, beyond Francis's absence. Brother Marcus, who was screaming in his cell before matins, is still missing. Brother Peter, an elderly monk who's been showing signs of increasing confusion, apparently didn't make it to the service. Brother David, one of the farm workers, is probably too ill to leave his cell. The monastery's population fluctuates constantly as death claims, older members, and new novices arrive to replace them. But the replacement rate has been declining in recent years as word spreads about the harsh realities of monastic life. Fewer young men are willing to trade the uncertainties of secular life for the guaranteed suffering of monastic discipline. The psalms for sext are sung in the same monotonous chant that accompanies all the daily services. Latin words flow over. You like water. Dies in adiutorium meum intend. God, come to my assistance. The irony is bitter. If God is paying attention to this community, his assistance seems to involve maximum suffering for his most devoted servants. Brother Thomas. The monk you noticed swaying during matins has found a place where he can lean against a stone pillar for support. His face has the waxy pallor that often precedes complete collapse, and his voice during the psalm responses is barely audible. He's probably weeks away from joining Brother Francis in the infirmary, if he lives that long. The service continues, with readings from Scripture that emphasize themes of suffering, patience, and endurance. Medieval monasticism draws heavily on the tradition of desert hermits who sought salvation through physical privation and spiritual discipline. The monastery is designed to recreate those conditions on a communal scale, testing each brother's commitment to his vows through daily trials that would break most men. You find your attention drifting during the scripture reading, your mind returning to the manuscript waiting on your copying desk. The Psalter must be completed by evening, which means every minute spent in prayer is a minute stolen from essential work. The tension between spiritual obligations and practical necessities creates constant stress that adds to the physical demands of monastic life. The reading concludes with a passage from St. Paul about the virtue of suffering for Christ's sake. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The lector intones in careful Latin. The words are meant to be inspiring, but they land with leaden weight on men who experience present suffering as their daily reality. After the concluding prayers and dismissal, you file out of the church with the other scribes to return to the scriptorium. The brief respite is over, and the afternoon's work awaits. Brother Joachim has already returned and is examining Brother Francis's unfinished manuscript with the expression of a man calculating losses. His work will have to be redistributed, he announces as you take your places at the copying desks. Brother William, you'll finish the prayer book in addition to your regular assignment. The deadline hasn't changed. Brother William, already responsible for copying a complex treatise on canon law, simply nods and accepts the additional burden. Complaining would be pointless and potentially dangerous. In monastic life, you adapt to increased demands or you fail, and failure has consequences that extend far beyond individual discomfort. You return to your Psalter with fresh resolve, knowing that Brother Francis's collapse serves as a warning about the pace of work and the price of weakness. The illuminated border you were working on before Sext has dried while you were at prayer, allowing you to add the next layer of detail without smudging the existing work. The afternoon copying session will be the longest of the day, 6 uninterrupted. Hours broken only by the brief Vespers service. Your body must sustain the same hunched position. Your eyes must maintain the same level of focus, and your hand must execute the same precise movements thousands of times. The mental and physical demands are enormous, and failure to maintain standards will result in punishment that makes the work even more difficult. Brother Joachim moves between the copying desks like a predator stalking prey, his attention focused on identifying errors before they become too extensive to correct. His standards are impossibly high, his criticism sharp and immediate, his punishments designed to reinforce the lesson that excellence is the only acceptable standard. You bend over your manuscript and pick up your quill, preparing for the long afternoon ahead. The decorated psalm slowly takes shape under your hands, each element carefully positioned, each line precisely executed. But the beauty of the finished work provides little consolation for the suffering required to create it. Outside the scriptorium windows, you can hear the sounds of other monks going about their various duties. Some are working in the kitchen, preparing the day's single meal. Others are tending the monastery's livestock or working in the fields that provide the community's basic food supply. A few are engaged in maintenance work, repairing buildings, and equipment that keep the monastery functioning. All of these activities are necessary for the community's survival, but none carries the prestige or importance attached to manuscript copying. The scriptorium generates the monastery's primary income and preserves the learning that justifies the institution's existence. As a scribe, you're simultaneously privileged and cursed, essential to the community's mission but subjected to working conditions that will eventually destroy your health. The hierarchy of monastic suffering is clearly defined. Farm workers face the hardest physical labor, but work outdoors in fresh air and sunlight. Kitchen staff deal with smoke and heat, but have access to food that other brothers never see. Scribes work in relative comfort, but under psychological pressure and physical demands that create different, but equally destructive forms of stress. At the top of this hierarchy sits Abbot Geoffrey, whose suffering consists mainly of the burden of authority and the challenges of managing a community constantly on the edge of financial and spiritual crisis. His quarters are heated, his meals adequate, his clothing warm, but he also bears responsibility for decisions that determine whether the monastery survives or fails, whether individual brothers live or die. The afternoon sun slants through the high windows of the scriptorium, creating patterns of light and shadow that shift slowly across the copying desks. The illumination changes gradually as the day progresses, requiring constant adjustment of oil lamps and careful positioning of manuscripts to catch the best available light. Your psalter gradually takes shape under your patient labor. Text and decoration combine to create a work of art that represents hundreds of hours of skilled craftsmanship. When completed, it will serve as a luxury item for a wealthy patron who can afford to commission personal devotional materials. The irony of creating objects for the wealthy while living in deliberately imposed poverty is another of the contradictions that define monastic life. Brother William, struggling with his increased workload, makes a small error in his canon law treatise. The mistake is minor, a single letter formed incorrectly, but Brother Joachim notices immediately and appears at his desk with the swift certainty of a hawk spotting prey. Carelessness, he says quietly, examining the offending letter. Scrape it clean and begin the word again. And remember that haste makes waste. Better to work slowly and correctly than quickly and carelessly. The correction will cost William at least 15 minutes and add to the pressure of completing both his original assignment and Brother Francis's unfinished work. The psychological stress of watching colleagues struggle and fail adds another layer of difficulty to work that's already demanding enough to break strong men. You focus on your own manuscript, determined not to make errors that would attract Brother Joachim's attention. The vine scrolls around the psalm text require absolute precision. Each curve must flow naturally into the next. Each leaf must be properly proportioned. Each detail must contribute to the overall harmony of the design. The work is genuinely absorbing when you can lose yourself in its demands. For brief periods, the outside world disappears, and there's only the flowing movement of the quill, the gradual emergence of beauty from blank parchment, the satisfaction of technical skill applied to worthy purpose. These moments of transcendence almost justify the suffering required to achieve them, but they're also dangerous. Losing yourself in the work means forgetting to monitor your posture, your breathing, the early warning signs of fatigue that signal the need for brief breaks. You've seen too many scribes push themselves past their limits in pursuit of perfection, only to collapse when their bodies finally rebel against impossible demands. The afternoon wears on with metronomic regularity. Quills scratch against parchment, oil lamps flicker and smoke, and the slow accumulation of completed work marks the passage of time more reliably than any clock. Your back aches, your eyes water, and your hand cramps, but the psalter grows line by line toward completion. This is your life now. This is the price of preserving medieval learning for future generations. This is the suffering that purchases salvation, one carefully copied word at a time. The beauty of the work is undeniable, but so is its cost in human terms. Every illuminated manuscript represents not just artistic achievement, but physical sacrifice, psychological stress, and spiritual struggle. The monks who create these works are simultaneously preserving civilization and being consumed by it. As the afternoon light begins to fade and the shadows in the scriptorium grow longer, you prepare for the final push toward completing your assignment. The bell for Vespers will ring in 2 hours, and the Psalter must be finished before evening prayer. There's no room for error, no time for rest, no margin for the weakness that claimed Brother Francis. Welcome to the contemplative life, where beauty and suffering are inextricably linked, and salvation comes at a price measured in blood, sweat, and years stolen from human lives in service to a higher purpose. The bell for Vespers releases you from 6 hours of continuous copying work, but the relief is temporary and incomplete. Your hand is cramped into a claw-like position around your quill, and it takes several minutes of careful stretching before your fingers can fully extend. Your spine feels permanently curved, molded by hours of hunching over manuscript pages, and straightening to a normal posture sends sharp pains through your lower back. The Psalter is nearly complete. Just 2 more pages of text and illumination remain. Under normal circumstances, this would represent about 2 hours of work, easily manageable after the evening meal. But these aren't normal circumstances. Today is Friday, which means no evening meal at all. The rule of Saint Benedict prescribes frequent fasting is essential to monastic discipline, and Fridays are completely meatless days with only bread and water after Vespers. Brother Joachim examines your progress with grudging approval. Acceptable work, he says, which counts as high praise from a man whose standards border on the impossible. You'll finish after the evening meal, then begin Brother Francis's prayer book tomorrow. The additional assignment hits you like a physical blow. Brother Francis's unfinished work will add at least 3 days to your regular copying duties, possibly more if his deteriorating handwriting has created problems that require extensive correction. The prospect of 12-hour copying days stretching into the indefinite future fills you with a despair that you carefully keep hidden from Brother Joachim's sharp eyes. Yes, brother, you reply with the automatic obedience that monastic life has trained into your responses. Questioning assignments or expressing reluctance would only result in additional punishment, possibly including the sort of public humiliation that destroys a monk's standing in the community. You join the procession filing out of the scriptorium toward the church for Vespers. The walk provides a few minutes of desperately needed movement, allowing blood to return to your cramped legs and giving your eyes a break from close focus work. But you know the relief is temporary. After evening prayer and the day's single meal, you'll return to the copying desk to finish the Psalter by candlelight. The church is darker than usual for Vespers, lit only by the candles on the altar and a few oil lamps scattered throughout the nave. The approaching winter means shorter days and longer periods of working by artificial light, which adds eye strain to the already demanding work of manuscript copying. Many scribes develop serious vision problems by their 3rd or 4th year of intensive copying work. Brother Francis's place in the choir stalls remains empty, but no one mentions his absence or inquires about his condition. Monastic discipline discourages excessive concern for individual suffering. Every brother must focus on his own spiritual development and trust that God will provide for those in need. The practical result is a community of men who suffer in isolation, unable to seek help or offer comfort without risking accusation of inappropriate attachment to worldly concerns. The Vespers service follows the same pattern as the other daily prayer times. Psalms chanted in Latin, scripture readings emphasizing themes of suffering and endurance, prayers for the community's continued existence in a hostile world. The ritual provides structure and meaning to days that might otherwise be unbearable. but it also reinforces the monastery's culture of accepted misery. Tonight's psalm selection includes Psalm 102. My days are like a shadow that lengthens, and I wither away like grass. The words seem particularly appropriate as you consider the gradual deterioration of your own health under the demands of copying work. Your eyesight is noticeably worse than when you entered the monastery 18 months ago. Your posture has changed permanently, creating the hunched shoulders and forward head position that mark experienced scribes. Your hands show the accumulated damage of repetitive motion and constant minor injuries. Abbot Jeffrey's sermon focuses on the virtue of patient endurance in the face of worldly suffering. Our Lord Jesus Christ calls us to take up our cross daily and follow him. He intones in the formal Latin that marks official monastery discourse. The cross of monastic life is heavy, but it purifies the soul and prepares us for eternal glory. The theological justification for systematic suffering is central to medieval monasticism. Physical privation, uncomfortable living conditions, and demanding work schedules aren't seen as unfortunate necessities, but as deliberate spiritual exercises designed to break down worldly attachments and redirect focus toward eternal concerns. Your aching back and bleeding fingers are evidence of spiritual progress, not occupational hazards. But the gap between theological theory and lived reality creates constant psychological tension. It's one thing to embrace suffering in the abstract as a path to salvation. It's another to maintain faith and hope while watching colleagues collapse from malnutrition and overwork. The daily reality of monastic life tests belief in ways that theoretical discussions of spirituality never address. The service concludes with prayers for the monastery's continued prosperity and for the souls of brothers who have died in service to the community. The list of deceased monks grows longer each year, and many of the deaths are directly attributable to the harsh conditions of monastic life. Brother Augustine, who rang the bells for 15 years, died of lung disease exacerbated by working in all weather conditions. Brother Martin, a skilled illuminator, died after collapsing at his copying desk from what appeared to be a heart attack brought on by stress and malnutrition. After the final prayers and dismissal, you file out of the church with mixed emotions. The promise of food, even the limited Friday meal of bread and water, provides something to anticipate. But you also know that tonight's copying session will be particularly difficult, working by candlelight when your eyes are already strained from the day's labor. The refectory, where the community takes its meals, is a long, narrow hall with wooden tables and benches worn smooth by generations of monks. The room is unheated except for body warmth, and winter meals often involve eating while your breath creates visible clouds in the frigid air. Tonight, with reduced food and no hot dishes to provide even minimal warmth, the meal will be an endurance test rather than a source of nourishment. Brother Paul, the monastery's cook, has prepared the Friday meal according to the strict requirements of the rule of Saint Benedict. Each brother receives a small loaf of dark bread, coarse and dense, baked from a mixture of barley and rye flour. The bread is accompanied by a cup of water and nothing else. No butter, no honey, no vegetables or fruits that might make the meal more palatable. You take your assigned place at one of the long tables and examine your portion with growing dismay. The bread loaf is smaller than usual, probably reflecting the monastery's ongoing financial difficulties. Brother Paul has been rationing ingredients for months, gradually reducing portion sizes in response to declining revenues from manuscript sales and agricultural production. The meal is eaten in complete silence, according to monastic tradition. One brother reads aloud from scripture while the others eat, creating an atmosphere of formal piety that transforms basic sustenance into religious exercise. Tonight's reading comes from the Book of Job, with its themes of innocent suffering and faithful endurance in the face of overwhelming adversity. The bread is nearly inedible, coarse, dry, and bitter with the taste of grain that's been stored too long in damp conditions. You force yourself to chew each bite thoroughly, knowing that this meager meal must sustain you through tomorrow morning's copying work. The water helps wash down the bread, but does nothing to address the gnawing hunger that has become a constant companion. Around you, 40 men eat their inadequate meals with the mechanical efficiency of people who have learned to extract maximum nutrition from minimal food. Faces are gaunt, hands trembling slightly from hunger and fatigue, but no one complains or makes any sign of dissatisfaction. Monastic discipline extends even to the expression of basic human needs. Brother Thomas, who showed signs of serious weakness during the day's prayer services, struggles with his bread portion. His movements are slow and uncertain, and you can see him breaking the loaf into small pieces that are easier to manage. He's probably days away from the kind of collapse that claimed Brother Francis, but there's nothing anyone can do to help without violating the community's rules about individual responsibility. The scripture reading continues with Job's lament. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? The question resonates through the silent refectory as men contemplate their own hidden ways and the hedge of monastic rules that constrains every aspect of their existence. Your hunger remains unsatisfied when you finish the last crumb of bread. The Friday meal provides just enough nutrition to sustain life, but not enough to eliminate the constant awareness of want. This controlled starvation is deliberate. Hunger sharpens spiritual focus and reminds brothers that their true nourishment comes from divine sources rather than worldly food. After the meal's conclusion, marked by a prayer of thanksgiving that seems ironic given the paucity of what you're thankful for, you return to the scriptorium for the evening copying session. Most of the other brothers retire to their cells for personal prayer and preparation for sleep, but the scribes face several more hours of work to meet their assigned deadlines. The scriptorium feels different at night. The high windows that provide natural light during the day now show only darkness, making the room feel smaller and more confining. Oil lamps and candles create pools of flickering light surrounded by deep shadows, and the atmosphere takes on an almost supernatural quality that would be mystical if it weren't so exhausting. Brother Joachim lights additional lamps around your copying desk, positioning them to provide the best possible illumination for close work. The flames dance in smoke, requiring constant adjustment to maintain steady light, and the risk of fire accidents increases dramatically during night work. Sessions. The Psalter must be completed tonight. He reminds you unnecessarily. The bishop's secretary arrives tomorrow morning, and delays will reflect poorly on the monastery's reputation. You nod and take your place at the copying desk, picking up your quill with hands that feel stiff and clumsy after the brief meal break. The final 2 pages of illuminated text stretch ahead of you like a mountain to be climbed, each letter and decorative element representing a small victory against the forces of fatigue and hunger that threaten to overwhelm your concentration. The candlelight flickers across the vellum surface, creating moving shadows that make precise work even more difficult than usual. Your eyes, already strained from the day's copying, water constantly in the smoky air. The beautiful Psalter that has consumed your day begins to blur around the edges as exhaustion affects your vision, but there's no choice except to continue. The manuscript deadline is absolute, and failure would result in punishment that might include reassignment to duties that would end your value to the community. You pick up your quill and begin the careful work of completing the final decorated initial, fighting against the tremor in your hand and the burning sensation in your eyes. This is the price of preserving civilization. Monks working by candlelight until their vision fails, copying manuscripts until their hands bleed, sustaining themselves on bread and water while creating luxury items for wealthy patrons who will never know the cost of their beautiful books. the night stretches ahead, filled with the scratch of quills on parchment and the flickering of flames that provide just enough light to continue the endless work of preservation. Welcome to the contemplative life, where beauty emerges from suffering and salvation is measured in completed manuscripts. The Psalter's final pages emerge slowly under your quill as the monastery settles into the deep quiet of night. Around you, most of your brothers have retired to their cells for the brief rest period before Matins calls them back to prayer at midnight. But the scriptorium remains active, lit by oil lamps and candles that create a warm island of light in the monastery's darkness. Brother Joachim works at his own desk, copying a particularly valuable treatise on canon law that requires his expertise to execute properly. His movements are precise and economical, showing no sign of the fatigue that makes your own hands tremble as you struggle with the intricate illumination work. He's been sustaining this pace for 12 years, and his body has adapted to demands that would break younger men. The silence in the scriptorium is profound but not peaceful. It's the silence of exhausted men pushing themselves beyond their physical limits, of concentration so intense that even breathing becomes deliberate and controlled. Your world is contracted to the small circle of parchment illuminated by your oil lamp, where each letter must be formed perfectly and each decorative element must align precisely with the overall design. The decorated initial you're working on, a large L, beginning the psalm, Lauda, anima me Dominum, praise the Lord, O my soul, requires intricate vine work that spirals through the letter's vertical stroke. Each tendril must be drawn with absolute precision, following the flowing organic curves that make the design appear natural despite its highly stylized execution. Your hand cramps as you guide the quill through a particularly complex curve. The repetitive motions of manuscript copying create specific injuries that mark the profession. Curved fingers from gripping writing tools, permanent ink stains on the fingertips, calluses that crack and bleed from constant friction. These occupational hazards are accepted as part of the scribe's sacrifice, physical evidence of dedication to preserving divine wisdom. Brother William, still struggling with the dual burden of his original assignment, and Brother Francis's unfinished work, makes a soft sound of frustration at his copying desk. The additional workload has pushed him past his normal limits, and his usually immaculate handwriting has deteriorated as fatigue affects his motor control. Each error requires time-consuming correction that puts him further behind schedule. Steady, brother, Joachim murmurs without looking up from his own work. Haste leads to errors, and errors lead to punishment. The warning is gentle but clear. Brother William's visible distress violates the monastic ideal of accepting all burdens with patient resignation. Expressing frustration, even quietly, suggests insufficient spiritual discipline and could result in additional penances designed to reinforce proper attitudes towards suffering. You return your attention to the vine scroll, carefully adding the tiny leaves that give the illumination its organic appearance. Each leaf must be properly proportioned and positioned, contributing to the overall harmony of the design while maintaining the precise geometry that underlies all successful manuscript decoration. The work requires artistic skill, technical expertise, and physical endurance that few people outside monastic communities ever develop. The candle flame flickers in a draft from somewhere in the building, causing shadows to dance across your parchment. You pause and adjust the lamp's position to restore steady illumination, then continue with the delicate work of adding detail to the decorative border. Every element must be completed tonight. There will be no opportunity for finishing touches tomorrow morning. Outside the scriptorium, you can hear the night sounds of the monastery settling into its brief rest period. Footsteps echo in distant corridors as brothers make their way to cells or night duties. The wind whispers around the building's stone walls, carrying with it the promise of another harsh winter that will test the community's endurance even more severely than the current. Autumn DISCOM for TS. Brother Francis remains absent from the night copying session. His condition is unknown. The monastery's approach to illness emphasizes privacy and individual responsibility for recovery. You won't learn his fate unless he returns to work or his death is announced during morning prayers. This deliberate ignorance about colleagues' suffering is another aspect of monastic discipline designed to prevent emotional attachments that might interfere with spiritual focus. The psalm text you're illuminating speaks of praising God with songs of joy. But the irony isn't lost on you as you work by candlelight with aching hands and burning eyes. Your praise takes the form of painstaking craftsmanship rather than joyful singing, and your devotion is measured by your willingness to sacrifice health and comfort in service to preserving divine wisdom. As the night deepens, the physical demands of copying work become even more challenging. The cold seeps through your woolen habit despite the warmth from oil lamps, making your joints stiff and painful. Your eyes water constantly from the smoke and strain of close work, blurring your vision and making precise letter formation increasingly difficult. The monastery's financial pressures add another layer of stress to the night's work. Every manuscript represents significant revenue potential, but only if it meets the exacting standards expected by wealthy patrons. A single serious error could reduce the psalter's value dramatically, potentially costing the community resources needed for basic survival. Brother Joachim rises from his desk and moves silently through the scriptorium, checking each scribe's progress and quality of work. His examination of your illumination is thorough and critical, searching for any flaw that might compromise the manuscript's value or reputation. Acceptable, he finally pronounces, which represents high praise from a man whose standards border on perfection. Complete the border work and begin final page of text. The manuscript must be ready for binding before matins. The timeline is aggressive, but achievable if nothing goes wrong. You have perhaps 2 hours to complete the remaining illumination and copy the final psalm text. The work must be flawless. There's no time for corrections or second attempts. Every stroke of your quill must be perfect on the first try. You bend back over your manuscript, ignoring the stabbing pain in your lower back and the persistent ache in your right shoulder. The decorated border gradually takes shape under your careful attention, each element building on the previous work to create a unified, artistic vision that will frame the sacred text for centuries to come. The beauty of the work provides some compensation for the suffering required to create it. Medieval manuscript illumination represents one of the highest artistic achievements of the age, combining technical skill, aesthetic sophistication, and spiritual devotion in works that transcend their practical function as books. Your anonymous labor contributes to a tradition that preserves and transmits the learning of ages. But the cost of this preservation is measured in human terms that the finished manuscripts never reveal. Every beautifully illuminated page represents hours of eye strain, back pain, and hand cramps endured by scribes whose names will never be known to the people who treasure their work. The books survive while their creators are consumed in their creation. Brother William suddenly slumps forward at his copying desk, his quill dropping from nerveless fingers to create an ink blot on his manuscript. The combined stress of overwork, hunger, and sleep deprivation has finally overwhelmed his ability to continue. His collapse creates an immediate crisis. His unfinished work must be completed by someone else, adding to an already impossible schedule. Brother Joachim appears at William's side immediately, checking for signs of life with the practiced efficiency of someone who has dealt with similar collapses before. "He's breathing," he announces quietly. "Help me get him to his cell. His work will have to be redistributed in the morning." You assist in carrying William's unconscious form from the scriptorium. his body frighteningly light from months of inadequate nutrition. The brief interruption costs valuable copying time, but there's no choice except to deal with the emergency and absorb the additional pressure it creates. When you return to your copying desk, the candle is burned lower and the oil in your lamp needs replenishing. You tend to these practical necessities quickly, then resume work on the Psalter with renewed urgency. William's collapse serves as a reminder of how quickly monastic life can change from demanding to impossible. The final hours of night, copying stretch ahead like a marathon race where the finish line keeps receding. Your body screams for rest. Your eyes burn with fatigue, and your hand trembles with each quill stroke. But the manuscript deadline is absolute, and failure would bring consequences that make tonight's suffering seem mild by comparison. This is the reality behind the romantic image of medieval monasteries as centers of learning and culture. The preservation of civilization requires human sacrifice on a scale that few people outside these walls ever understand. Every beautiful book in every medieval library represents not just knowledge preserved, but lives consumed in its preservation. The candle flame gutters and dies just as you complete the border decoration around the final song. You quickly light a fresh candle from your oil lamp and continue with the text copying that will complete your assignment. There's no time to rest, no margin for error, no possibility of delay. Welcome to the night watch of medieval learning, where beauty emerges from suffering and knowledge is preserved at the cost of those who preserve it. Matins bell tolls at midnight, its bronze voice cutting through the monastery's darkness like a blade through flesh. You've been copying for 18 hours with only brief breaks for prayer and the inadequate Friday meal. The Psalter is finally complete, every letter perfectly formed, every illumination precisely executed, every detail meeting Brother Joachim's impossible standards. But the triumph feels hollow when measured against the cost. In human suffering, your hands shake uncontrollably as you set down your quill for the final time. The tremor isn't from cold or nervousness, but from pure physical exhaustion. Muscles pushed beyond their limits, nerves frayed by hours of precise control, tendons inflamed from repetitive motion. You try to flex your fingers and discover that your right hand has partially seized, the index and middle fingers locked in the curved position required for gripping a quill. Excellent work, Brother Joachim pronounces, examining the completed Psalter with the critical eye of a master evaluating student work. The bishop's secretary will be pleased. Begin binding preparation immediately after lauds. The prospect of additional work hits you like a physical blow. Binding preparation involves cutting, folding, and sewing the manuscript pages into book form. Detailed work that requires the same precision and attention as copying, but uses different muscle groups that are already strained from supporting 18 hours of hunched posture. You nod obediently, knowing that expressing exhaustion or requesting rest would only invite punishment designed to reinforce proper monastic attitudes towards suffering. The rule of St. Benedict emphasizes that monks should be grateful for opportunities to serve, regardless of personal cost. Your breaking body is evidence of spiritual progress, not cause for concern. The walk to the church for matins provides a few minutes of movement that helps restore circulation to your cramped legs, but it also reveals the full extent of your physical deterioration. Your posture has changed noticeably. Shoulders hunched forward, head thrust ahead of your spine, lower back curved in a permanent arch that speaks of too many hours bent over copying desks. These postural changes mark experienced scribes as clearly as battle scars mark veteran soldiers. The church is darker than usual for the midnight service, lit only by altar candles that create dramatic shadows among the stone pillars. 40 men file into their assigned places with the mechanical precision of marionettes, their movements controlled by invisible strings of monastic discipline that override individual will and comfort. Brother William's place in the choir stalls remains empty, His collapse in the scriptorium has apparently been serious enough to confine him to his cell or the infirmary. The additional workload his absence creates will be distributed among the remaining scribes, adding to already impossible schedules. In monastic logic, increased suffering is simply increased opportunity for spiritual growth. Brother Francis's absence is now permanent. During the psalm responses, you notice that his prayer book and personal possessions have been removed from his choir stall. The implications are clear. Either he's died from his collapse yesterday morning, or he's been judged too weak to continue monastic life and expelled from the community. Either fate represents complete failure in the eyes of the monastery's leadership. The Matin service follows the familiar pattern of psalms, readings, and prayers that structure monastic time. But tonight, the words seem to blur together in your exhausted mind. Latin phrases becoming meaningless sounds that mark the passage of minutes rather than expressions of devotion. You find yourself swaying slightly as you stand, fighting against the exhaustion that threatens to claim consciousness entirely. Psalm 130 resonates. Through the cold air, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. The words capture something essential about monastic experience, the sense of drowning in suffering so profound that only divine intervention can provide salvation. But salvation seems very distant at midnight in a stone church filled with exhausted, malnourished men whose lives are measured by completed manuscripts rather than personal fulfillment. Abbot Jeffrey's brief sermon focuses on the virtue of perseverance through trials. Saint Benedict teaches us that the path to God leads through the narrow gate of tribulation. He intones in formal Latin. Those who endure suffering with patience will inherit eternal glory. The theological justification for systematic misery is central to monastic philosophy, but the gap between theory and practice creates constant psychological tension. It's easier to embrace suffering as spiritually meaningful when you're not actually suffering, and the daily reality of monastic life tests faith in ways that abstract discussions never address. The service concludes with prayers for the monasteries, continued survival, and for the souls of brothers who have died in community service. The list of the deceased grows longer each year, and many deaths are directly attributable to the harsh conditions of monastic life. Yet these deaths are presented as evidence of successful spiritual discipline rather than institutional failure. After dismissal, most brothers return to their cells for the brief rest period before lauds at dawn. But the scriptorium workers face different demands. Manuscripts don't observe the canonical hours, and deadlines care nothing for human needs. You join the small group of scribes filing back to the copying room for another session of work that will continue until morning prayer. The scriptorium feels different after midnight. The oil lamps seem dimmer, the shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. Your copying desk has been cleared of the completed psalter, leaving only a blank work surface that awaits tomorrow's assignment. The thought of beginning another manuscript after 18 hours of continuous work creates a despair so profound that you struggle to comprehend how you will sustain this pace for years to come. Brother Joachim distributes new assignments with the mechanical efficiency of a man who has supervised breaking points before. Brother Francis's prayer book must be completed by Sunday, he announces. Brother William's canon law treatise needs finishing by Tuesday. The Psalms of David commission require starting immediately. The workload is impossible under normal circumstances and crushing given your current state of exhaustion. But impossible isn't a concept that monastic discipline recognizes. There are only assignments to be completed, and brothers who are either strong enough to complete them or weak enough to fail. You take your assigned place at a copying desk and examine Brother Francis's unfinished prayer book. His deteriorating handwriting tells the story of his collapse. Early pages show neat, controlled letters, but the most recent work reveals the trembling hand and irregular spacing that mark a scribe pushed beyond his limits. Completing his work will require not just copying the remaining text, but correcting errors that compromise the manuscript's value. The oil lamp at your desk flickers and threatens to die, its fuel nearly exhausted after hours of continuous burning. You refill it from a nearby container, noting that your hands shake so badly that you spill oil on the desk surface. The tremor is getting worse, probably a combination of exhaustion, hunger, and the nerve damage that affects scribes who work too long under impossible conditions. Brother Joachim appears at your shoulder as you prepare to begin copying Francis' says. Text. Steady hands are essential, he observes quietly. Perhaps you need additional spiritual discipline to improve your focus. The suggestion is both threat and diagnosis. Additional spiritual discipline means extra fasting, longer prayer periods, and possibly physical penances designed to reinforce proper monastic attitudes. The prescription will make your physical condition worse while demanding even higher standards of work performance. I'll manage, brother, you reply, hoping to avoid punishment that would make an impossible situation completely hopeless. He studies you with the calculating gaze of a man evaluating livestock. See that you do. The monastery's reputation depends on maintaining quality standards regardless of individual limitations. You pick up your quill and begin the careful work of copying Brother Francis's prayer text, fighting against the tremor in your hand and the burning sensation in your eyes. Each letter must be formed perfectly despite your deteriorating physical condition. Each word must align properly despite the exhaustion that makes precise control nearly impossible. The night stretches ahead like an endurance test designed by sadists. More copying, more eye strain, more hand cramps, more psychological pressure to maintain impossible standards, while your body systematically breaks down under demands that no human being should be expected to sustain. This is where monastic idealism collides with biological reality. The spiritual rhetoric about embracing suffering becomes meaningless when that suffering reaches levels that destroy the very capacity for spiritual reflection. You've passed the breaking point and entered territory where survival becomes the only meaningful goal. Around you, other scribes labor under similar pressures, their faces drawn with exhaustion, their movements mechanical and precise despite the obvious cost in human terms. This is the hidden reality behind medieval manuscript preservation, not noble scholars preserving civilization, but broken men working until they die in service to an institution that values productivity over human dignity. The candle flame dances in the draft from somewhere in the building, casting moving shadows across Brother Francis's unfinished text. You bend over the manuscript and continue copying, one letter at a time, one word at a time, one line at a time, fighting against the tide of exhaustion that threatens to sweep away consciousness entirely. Welcome to the breaking point of medieval monasticism, where the preservation of knowledge requires the destruction of those who preserve it, and salvation is measured by the manuscripts completed rather than the lives consumed in their creation. Dawn arrives without ceremony, marked only by the gradual replacement of candlelight with the gray illumination filtering through the scriptorium's high windows. You've worked through the entire night, copying text from Brother Francis's prayer book while fighting against exhaustion so profound that you sometimes forget where you are mid-sentence. The manuscript is perhaps half completed, but every letter represents a victory against forces that threaten to overwhelm your remaining capacity for conscious thought. Your body has passed beyond ordinary fatigue into a realm where pain becomes constant background noise and normal physical functions require deliberate effort. Your vision blurs intermittently, creating double images that make precise copying work nearly impossible. Your right hand cramps persistently, the fingers locked in a curved position that mirrors the grip required for holding a quill. Most alarmingly, You've begun experiencing brief periods where consciousness seems to flicker, leaving gaps in memory where automatic behavior continues without conscious control. Brother Joachim moves through the scriptorium like a specter, his presence felt rather than seen as he evaluates each scribe's work and condition. His standards remain impossibly high despite the obvious deterioration in his workers' capabilities. Quality is the only measure that matters in his domain. Human suffering is simply the price that must be paid for excellence. Acceptable progress, he pronounces after examining your night's work. The assessment is grudging, but represents significant. Praise from a man who finds fault with even the most skilled copying. Continue until lauds, then join the morning service. The prospect of additional work followed by standing through another prayer service seems impossible given your current condition, but impossible isn't a word that monastic discipline recognizes. You nod obediently and return to the manuscript, picking up your quill with hands that feel disconnected from your conscious will. The prayer book. Text you're copying deals with themes of suffering and endurance. Appropriate content given your current circumstances. Lord, you test those whom you love, reads one passage, and through tribulation you prepare them for eternal glory. The irony would be amusing if you had energy left for humor. Brother Thomas, who showed signs of serious weakness during yesterday's services, has failed to appear for the night copying session. His absence probably indicates either collapse or death, but no official announcement has been made. In monastic life, individual tragedies are absorbed into the community's routine with minimal disruption. There are always manuscripts to be copied and deadlines to be met. As morning light strengthens, you become more aware of the physical deterioration. That marks the other scribes working around you. Brother Matthew, who's been copying manuscripts for 8 years, shows the characteristic postural deformities of long-term copying work. Hunched shoulders, curved spine, and the forward head. Position that creates chronic neck pain. His handwriting remains excellent, but his movements are increasingly stiff and careful. Brother Luke, a younger monk who's been assigned to copying work for only 6 months, already shows signs of the eye problems that affect most scribes. He squints constantly, holds manuscripts closer to his face than normal, and frequently pauses to rub his eyes with ink-stained fingers. His vision is probably deteriorating rapidly under the strain of constant close work by inadequate lighting. The monastery's approach to occupational health problems is brutally practical. Work until you can't work anymore, then accept whatever fate befalls you. There are no provisions for reducing workloads to accommodate physical limitations. No alternative assignments for scribes whose vision fails. No retirement plans for brothers whose bodies break down under impossible demands. Your own deterioration accelerates as the night's work continues. The tremor in your right hand becomes more pronounced, making precise letter formation increasingly difficult. Your lower back spasms intermittently, sending shooting pains down your legs that threaten to buckle your knees. Most concerning, you've begun experiencing brief moments of confusion where you forget which letter you're copying or lose track of your place in the text. The bell for lauds rings just as you complete another page of Brother Francis's prayer book. The sound cuts through your exhaustion like a physical blow, reminding you that the night's copying session is only the beginning of another full day of work. After morning prayer and the day's inadequate meal, you'll return to the scriptorium for another 12 hours of manuscript copying. You set down your quill and attempt to stand, discovering that your legs have gone numb from sitting in the same position for hours. The sensation of pins and needles floods through your lower extremities as circulation slowly returns, accompanied by stabbing pains that make walking difficult. Around you, other scribes struggle with similar problems. The occupational hazards of extended copying work. The walk to the church provides a few minutes of desperately needed movement, but it also reveals the full extent of your physical deterioration. Your gait has become unsteady, partly from exhaustion and partly from the postural changes that affect all long-term scribes. Your vision remains blurry, creating double images that make navigating the monastery's corridors hazardous. The church is warmer than the scriptorium, heated by the presence of 40 men gathered for morning prayer. You take your assigned place in the choir stalls, grateful for the opportunity to stand upright and allow your spine to decompress slightly. But you know the relief is temporary. After lauds and the morning meal, you'll return to the hunched position that's slowly destroying your posture and health. Several empty places in the choir mark brothers who have failed to appear for morning prayer. Brother Thomas's absence is now official, suggesting that his condition has deteriorated beyond the point where recovery is possible. Brother William remains absent, his collapse in the scriptorium apparently more serious than initially apparent. Brother Francis's stall has been permanently reassigned, confirming that his monastic career has ended in either death or expulsion. The attrition rate among scribes is significantly higher than for other monastic occupations. The combination of eye strain, postural stress, and psychological pressure creates health problems that often prove fatal within a few years of beginning intensive copying work. Yet the monastery continues recruiting new scribes because the revenue from manuscript copying is essential for institutional survival. Abbot Jeffrey's Sermon for Lauds focuses on the virtue of sacrifice in service to God's greater glory. Those who lose their lives in divine service will find them again in eternal blessedness. He intones in the formal Latin that distances theological concepts from lived reality. The gap between abstract spirituality and concrete suffering creates cognitive dissonance that many monks resolve by simply stopping thinking about the contradictions. The Lauds service includes Psalm 51, "Create in me a clean heart, O God," and "Renew a steadfast spirit within me." The words resonate with particular intensity as you contemplate the gradual destruction of your own heart and spirit under conditions that seem designed to break rather than purify the human soul. After the concluding prayers and dismissal, you file out of the church with the other brothers to attend the morning meal. The prospect of food, even the monastery's inadequate fare, provides something to anticipate. But you also know that eating requires energy that you're not sure you still possess, and digesting food will divert resources from the copying work that awaits. The refectory is crowded with brothers whose faces show varying degrees of exhaustion, malnutrition, and resignation. The monastery's population includes men at all stages of physical deterioration, from recently arrived novices who still retain some flesh on their bones to veteran monks, whose bodies have been hollowed out by years of systematic privation. Your morning meal consists of a small portion of barley porridge, thin and watery, accompanied by a piece of yesterday's bread and a cup of diluted ale. The food is barely adequate to sustain life, much less support the physical demands of 12-hour copying sessions. Yet this meager fare must fuel another day of work that would challenge well-fed men under ideal conditions. You eat mechanically, too exhausted to taste the food or care about its inadequacy. Around you, 40 men consume their portions with the efficiency of people who have learned to extract maximum nutrition from minimal resources. Conversation is forbidden during meals, creating an atmosphere of formal silence that reinforces the monastery's culture of isolation and individual suffering. The meal concludes with prayers of thanksgiving that seem ironic given the paucity of what you're supposed to be grateful for. Brother Paul, the cook, has prepared the best meal possible given the monastery's limited resources. But best possible falls far short of what human beings need to sustain demanding physical and intellectual work. After breakfast, you return to the scriptorium for another day of copying work that will test the limits of human endurance. The morning light streaming through the high windows provides better illumination than the oil lamps and candles of night work, but it also reveals the full extent of the damage that 24 hours of continuous copying has inflicted on your hands and eyes. Brother Joachim distributes the day's assignments with mechanical efficiency, paying no attention to the obvious deterioration in his worker's condition. The prayer book must be completed by evening, he announces. The canon. Law treatise needs starting immediately. Excellence remains the only acceptable standard. You take your place at the copying desk and examine Brother Francis's prayer book, noting the places where your night work shows signs of the tremor that's been affecting your right hand. The quality is still acceptable by monastery standards, but the subtle irregularities mark the beginning of the decline that eventually claims all scribes who work under these conditions. This is the reality behind medieval manuscript preservation, not noble scholars preserving civilization in peaceful libraries, but broken men working until they die in scriptoriums that function more like factories than centers of learning. The beautiful illuminated books that survive in modern museums represent not just artistic achievement, but human sacrifice on a scale that history rarely acknowledges. You pick up your quill and begin another day of copying, fighting against exhaustion, pain, and the growing certainty that this life will eventually kill you. But there are manuscripts to be completed, deadlines to be met, and standards to be maintained regardless of the cost. In human terms, welcome to the price of perfection, where beauty is purchased with blood and knowledge is preserved through the systematic destruction of those who preserve it. 3 days pass in a blur of quill strokes, aching hands, and the gradual recognition that your body is systematically failing under demands no human being should be expected to sustain. Brother Francis's prayer book is finally complete, but the cost of finishing his work while maintaining your regular copying assignments has pushed you past the limits of normal endurance into territory where each day becomes a struggle for basic survival. Your right hand has developed a permanent tremor that makes precise copying work increasingly difficult. The index finger remains partially paralyzed, locked in the curved position required for gripping a quill and attempts to straighten. It results in shooting pains that radiate up your arm. Calluses on your fingertips have cracked so deeply that they bleed onto the parchment, creating stains that must be carefully scraped away before they ruin expensive manuscripts. Your vision has deteriorated noticeably over the past 3 days. Objects at normal reading distance appear blurry, and you've begun holding manuscripts closer to your face to see the text clearly. The constant eye strain from working by candlelight and oil lamps has left your eyes perpetually red and watering, with a burning sensation that persists even when you're not actively copying. Most alarming of all, you've begun experiencing episodes of confusion and memory loss. Yesterday, you found yourself staring at a partially completed page without any recollection of copying the previous lines. This morning, you began writing the wrong text entirely, catching the error only when Brother Joachim appeared at your shoulder with the expression of a man calculating financial losses. Your work is becoming unreliable, he observes with clinical detachment, examining the corrected page with disapproval. Perhaps you need additional spiritual discipline to improve your focus and dedication. The threat is both specific and ominous. Additional spiritual discipline means extended fasting, longer prayer periods, and possibly physical penances that will worsen your already deteriorating condition, while demanding even higher standards of work performance. It's a downward spiral that has claimed dozens of scribes before you and will claim dozens more after you're gone. I understand, brother, you reply, hoping to avoid punishments that would accelerate your decline toward complete breakdown. I'll maintain better focus. He studies you with the calculating gaze of a master, evaluating a tool that's beginning to show wear. See that you do. The monastery's reputation depends on consistent quality, regardless of individual limitations. The Monasteries' reputation built on the systematic destruction of human beings seems like a poor foundation for institutional pride. But such thoughts are dangerous to express or even think too clearly. Monastic discipline extends to mental as well as physical submission, and questioning the system that consumes you is the quickest path to punishment that would make your current suffering seem mild. You return to your copying desk and examine the morning's assignment, a complex treatise on canonical law that requires not just accurate copying, but understanding of legal concepts that must be rendered, precisely to avoid creating heretical content. The work demands intellectual engagement at a level that's becoming increasingly difficult to sustain, given your deteriorating physical and mental condition. Around you, the other scribes labor under similar pressures with varying degrees of success. Brother Matthew, whose 8 years of copying work have left him with severe postural deformities, shows signs of the respiratory problems that often develop when curved spines compress lung capacity. His breathing has become labored, and he pauses frequently to rest despite the pressure to maintain continuous productivity. Brother Luke, the younger monk whose vision has been failing over his 6 months of intensive copying work, has begun making errors that suggest he can no longer see the text clearly. His letters are increasingly irregular, his spacing uneven, and his attempts at decorative work show the uncertain hand of someone working essentially blind. His decline is accelerating, and he'll probably be reassigned to other duties within weeks, if he lives that long. The scriptorium has become a workshop, where human beings are systematically broken in service to preserving medieval learning. The beautiful manuscripts that emerge from this room represent not just artistic and intellectual achievement, but a form of human sacrifice that history rarely acknowledges. Every illuminated page costs months or years of a scribe's life. Every completed book represents irreversible damage to the man who copied it. Your own manuscript gradually takes shape under your increasingly unsteady hand. The canonical law text flows across the vellum in careful black letters that hide the tremor, affecting your grip and the pain shooting through your cramped fingers. Each word requires conscious effort. Each line demands sustained concentration that grows more difficult as fatigue accumulates. The morning passes with mechanical regularity. Copying, correcting, copying again, pausing only for the brief sext. Service that provides a few minutes of movement and upright posture. The relief is minimal and temporary, just enough to prevent complete collapse, while ensuring that you can return to work for the afternoon session that will continue until evening prayer. Brother William has returned from the infirmary, but his appearance suggests that his collapse was more serious than initially apparent. His face has the waxy pallor of someone recovering from significant illness, and his movements are careful and deliberate. The additional copying workload created by his absence has been redistributed among the remaining scribes, adding to schedules that were already impossible under normal conditions. Brother William will resume limited duties, Brother Joachim announces during the brief break for sext. His regular assignments will be divided among the other scribes until his full recovery. The prospect of additional work hits you like a physical blow. Your current assignments already require 12-hour days that leave no margin for errors or delays. Adding Brother William's copying duties to your schedule means working even longer hours under conditions that are already destroying your health and sanity. But there's no point in objecting or requesting relief. Monastic discipline doesn't recognize individual limitations. There are only assignments to be completed and brothers who are either strong enough to complete them or weak enough to fail. Your deteriorating condition is evidence of insufficient spiritual discipline, not grounds for reducing demands. The afternoon copying session begins with the redistribution of Brother William's work among the active scribes. Your additional assignment is a psalter similar to the one you completed 3 days ago. Beautiful work that requires both skilled copying and intricate illumination. Under normal circumstances, such a commission would be an honor that demonstrates confidence in your abilities. Given your current condition, it feels more like a death sentence. You examine the exemplar manuscript that you'll be copying, noting the complex decorative elements that will require absolute precision to execute properly. Each illuminated initial must be reproduced exactly. Every vine scroll must follow the original design. Every detail must contribute to the overall artistic vision that makes these books valuable to wealthy patrons. The work begins with outlining. The first decorative letter, a large B that begins the psalm, Beatus vera qui non abiet. Blessed is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked. The irony isn't lost on you as you struggle with trembling hands to trace the flowing curves that will frame this text about blessedness. Your current situation feels more like a punishment for walking in very wicked counsel indeed. Your quill skips across the vellum as the tremor in your right hand affects your motor control. The line you've drawn wavers noticeably, creating an irregularity that compromises the letter's geometric precision. You scrape away the error with your knife and begin again, knowing that Brother Joachim will examine every detail with ruthless attention to flaws. The correction process is slower and more difficult than the original work. Removing ink from vellum without damaging the underlying surface requires delicate touch and steady hands, qualities that are increasingly beyond your capabilities. Each mistake costs valuable time and increases the pressure to work faster on. Subsequent elements start as the afternoon progresses. Your condition continues to deteriorate. The tremor spreads from your right hand to your entire arm, making it increasingly difficult to maintain the precise control required for illumination work. Your vision blurs intermittently, creating double images that make accurate copying nearly impossible. Most concerning, you begin experiencing brief blackouts where consciousness flickers and you lose track of time and place. Brother Joachim appears at your desk during one of these episodes, finding you staring blankly at a half-completed decorative border without any apparent awareness of your surroundings. His expression combines annoyance with the calculating assessment of a man deciding whether a broken tool is worth repairing. "Are you ill, brother?" he asked at the tone of someone hoping for a negative answer. The question is loaded with implications. Admitting illness would provide grounds for medical attention, but also for reassignment to duties that might not utilize your copying skills. Denying illness despite obvious symptoms would leave you vulnerable to punishment for declining work quality. Neither option offers much hope for improvement. "I'm experiencing some fatigue, brother," you reply carefully, trying to minimize the situation while acknowledging what can't be hidden. "Fatigue is a spiritual problem," he responds with the certainty of someone who has never experienced genuine exhaustion. "Perhaps additional prayer and fasting will restore your focus and dedication." The prescription is exactly what you feared. More suffering added to a situation that's already beyond endurance. Extended fasting will worsen your physical condition, while demanding higher performance standards. Longer prayer periods will reduce the rest time you desperately need while increasing the psychological pressure to demonstrate spiritual worthiness. "Yes, brother," you reply, because there's no other acceptable response to such pronouncements. He examines your afternoon's work with growing disapproval, noting the irregular lines and uncertain decorative elements that mark the deterioration in your skills. "This quality is unacceptable," he pronounces finally. "Begin the page again and maintain proper standards." Starting over means losing an entire afternoon's work and falling further behind on an already impossible schedule. But there's no choice except to scrape away the completed illumination and begin again, with hands that shake more violently with each passing hour, and eyes that can barely focus on the work surface. This is where monastic idealism meets biological reality in a collision that destroys both spiritual meaning and human dignity. The preservation of medieval learning requires breaking the people who preserve it, and the beautiful manuscripts that survive represent not just cultural achievement but evidence of systematic brutality disguised as spiritual discipline. You pick up your quill and begin the decorative letter again, fighting against tremors, pain, and confusion that threaten to overwhelm consciousness entirely. Each line must be perfect, despite the impossibility of achieving perfection under these conditions. Each element must align precisely despite hands that no longer obey conscious control. The afternoon stretches ahead like an endurance test designed by people who have forgotten that scribes are human beings rather than copying machines. More work, more pain, more a gradual dissolution of the capabilities that once made you valuable to this community. Welcome to the breaking of bodies in service, to an ideal that consumes those who serve it most faithfully. A week passes in a haze of deteriorating function and accumulating despair. Your hand tremor has worsened to the point where holding a quill requires conscious effort, and your attempts at decorative work produce irregular lines that Brother Joachim rejects with increasing frequency. The constant corrections cost precious time and add to the psychological pressure of falling behind on impossible deadlines. Your vision problems have progressed beyond simple blurring to include periods of complete visual blackout that last several seconds at a time. During these episodes, you find yourself staring at manuscripts without any ability to see the text, forcing you to pause and wait for sight to return while precious copying time ticks away. The intervals between blackouts are growing shorter, and the duration of each episode is increasing. Most alarmingly, your memory has become unreliable to the point where you sometimes forget basic information like which manuscript you're copying or what text you're supposed to be reproducing. Yesterday, you spent an hour copying the wrong psalm before Brother Joachim discovered your error and forced you to scrape away the entire page and start over. The incident confirmed his growing suspicion that you're no longer reliable for important copying work. Your performance has become unacceptable, he announces during this morning's work assignment distribution. You'll be transferred to basic copying duties until your condition improves. The demotion is both relief and disaster. Relief, because basic copying work doesn't require the precise motor control needed for illumination, but disturbs it, marks you as a failing asset whose value to the monastery is rapidly declining. Scribes who can't handle complex assignments are usually reassigned to manual labor, or, if their decline continues, quietly encouraged to leave the community. Your new assignment is copying a simple prayer book, text only, no decoration, no complex formatting requirements. The work is theoretically easier than illuminated manuscripts, but your deteriorating condition makes even basic copying increasingly difficult. Your handwriting, once neat and controlled, has become irregular and uncertain as the tremor affects. Your ability to form letters consistently. Brother Luke, whose vision problems have progressed even faster than yours, sits at the desk beside you struggling with his own reduced assignment. His copying is barely legible now. Letters form more by muscle memory than by conscious sight. He'll probably be transferred out of the scriptorium within days, joining the ranks of former scribes whose bodies have been broken by copying work. The monastery's approach to declining scribes is brutally practical. Men whose copying skills deteriorate are moved to progressively simpler assignments until they reach the point where their work has no value. At that stage, they're reassigned to manual labor if their bodies can handle it, or simply allowed to waste away in cells where they won't interfere with productive activities. You begin copying the prayer book text with hands that feel disconnected from conscious control. Each letter requires deliberate effort. Each word demands sustained concentration that grows more difficult as fatigue and confusion accumulate. The simple text blurs in and out of focus as your vision problems worsen, creating double images. that make accurate copying nearly impossible. Around you, the other scribes continue their work with the mechanical persistence of people who have learned to ignore physical deterioration in favor of maintaining productivity. Brother Matthew's breathing has become increasingly labored as his curved spine compresses his lung capacity, but he continues copying complex legal texts with hands that tremble from respiratory distress. Brother William, recently returned from his collapse, shows signs of the cognitive problems that often follow serious episodes of malnutrition and exhaustion. His copying is technically accurate, but lacks the fluidity and confidence that once marked his work as exceptional. He's become another broken tool maintained in service, until complete failure makes replacement necessary. The morning passes with agonizing slowness as you struggle to maintain even the reduced standards expected for basic copying work. Your prayer book gradually accumulates text, but each page requires multiple corrections and represents hours of effort that would once have taken minutes to complete. The decline in your productivity is obvious to everyone in the SCR, IPTOR, IUM. Brother Joachim makes his rounds with the attention of a supervisor evaluating equipment that's showing signs of wear. His examination of your work is brief but thorough, noting the irregular letters and uncertain spacing that mark declining motor control. His expression reveals nothing, but you know he's calculating the point where your continued presence becomes more liability than asset. Maintain consistent letter formation, he commands after finding several words that will require correction. Irregular handwriting reduces manuscript value and reflects poorly on community standards. The criticism is fair but impossible to address given your deteriorating condition. Your hands no longer obey conscious control with sufficient precision to form letters consistently, and your vision problems make it difficult to judge spacing and alignment accurately. You're fighting a losing battle against biological limitations, while being held to standards that assume normal human function. The midday bell for sext provides a brief respite from copying work, but the walk to church reveals the full extent of your physical deterioration. Your gait has become unsteady as the postural changes from months of hunched copying work affect your balance and coordination. Other brothers notice your difficulties and give you a wider berth, unconsciously avoiding contact with someone who represents their potential future. The church is warmer than the scriptorium, but even this minimal comfort feels excessive given your declining sensitivity to environmental conditions. Your body's systems are beginning to shut down non-essential functions in favor of maintaining basic life support, and the gradual loss of normal responses to heat, cold, and physical comfort marks another stage in your systematic breakdown. Several empty places in the choir mark brothers who have reached the end of their usefulness to the community. Brother Thomas, who disappeared from copying work 2 weeks ago, is rumored to have died in his cell from complications related to malnutrition and exhaustion. Brother Peter, an elderly scribe whose mind finally broke under years of pressure, was quietly transferred to a monastery that accepts brothers too damaged for productive work. The sex service includes Psalm 88, one of the darkest passages in the biblical collection. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. The words capture something essential about your current experience. The sense of being deliberately crushed by forces beyond your control or understanding. Abbot Jeffrey's brief sermon focuses on the virtue of accepting God's will regardless of personal circumstances. The righteous man does not question divine providence. He intones informal Latin, but accepts all trials as opportunities for spiritual growth. The theological framework provides meaning for systematic suffering, while absolving the institution of responsibility for the human cost of its operations. After the service, you return to the scriptorium for the afternoon copying session that will test what remains of your failing capabilities. Your prayer book waits on the copying desk like a monument to declining function, each completed page representing a small victory against the forces destroying your ability to work. The afternoon light streaming through the scriptorium windows reveals the full extent of the damage that copying work has inflicted on your hands. The tremor is now constant and visible, affecting not just fine motor control, but gross motor functions as well. Your fingers remain partially paralyzed in the curved position required for gripping a quill, and attempts to straighten them result in shooting pains that radiate through your entire arm. You pick up your quill and attempt to continue copying the prayer book text, but the letters you form are increasingly irregular and difficult to read. Each stroke requires conscious effort and sustained concentration that grows more difficult as confusion clouds your thinking. The gap between intention and execution widens with each passing hour. Brother Joachim appears at your desk as you struggle with a particularly challenging passage of Latin text. His examination of your work is brief but decisive, noting the deteriorating handwriting and frequent errors that mark the final stages of a scribe's decline. Report to Brother Benedict in the infirmary. He commands with the tone of someone disposing of broken equipment. Your copying duties are suspended until further notice. The dismissal is both relief and catastrophe. Relief, because the impossible pressure to maintain standards is temporarily lifted, but catastrophe, because it marks the end of your value to the monastery and the beginning of whatever fate awaits brothers who can no longer contribute to the community's survival. You set down your quill for what may be the last time and rise from the copying desk with movements that feel uncertain and disconnected. The other scribes continue their work without acknowledging your departure in monastic life. Individual failures are absorbed into the community's routine with minimal disruption. The walk to the infirmary provides a final glimpse of the monastery, where you've spent the last months destroying your health in service to preserving medieval learning. The stone corridors, the cold air, the ever-present sound of bells marking the canonical hours. All of it feels distant and unreal as your grip on normal consciousness continues to loosen. Brother Benedict, the monastery's infirmarian, examines you with the clinical detachment of someone who has processed dozens of broken scribes over the years. His diagnosis is swift and certain, based on symptoms he's seen too many times before. Scribes decline. He pronounces with professional efficiency. Advanced stage. Treatment options are limited. The medical terminology disguises a simple reality. You've been worked until your body and mind have broken, and there's no treatment that can restore what months of systematic abuse have destroyed. You've joined the ranks of used-up men, whose service to the monastery has ended in permanent disability or death. This is the hidden cost of medieval manuscript preservation, not just the time and effort required to copy texts, but the human lives consumed in the process. Every beautiful illuminated book represents not just artistic achievement, but evidence of an institutional system that destroys people in service to preserving knowledge. You lie on the infirmary cot and stare at the stone ceiling, contemplating the wreckage of ambitions that once seemed meaningful. The contemplative life has contemplated you back into something barely recognizable as human, and the salvation you sought has transformed into a form of damnation, measured in damaged hands and failing sight. Welcome to the descent into darkness, where the preservation of light requires the consumption of those who tend its flame. The monastery's infirmary occupies a long, narrow hall adjacent to the church, its stone walls lined with simple wooden cots that house the various casualties of monastic life. The air carries the distinctive smell of herbal medicines, unwashed bodies, and the sweet odor of decay that marks places where men come to die. Brother Benedict, the infirmarian, moves between patients with the efficient detachment of someone who has learned to view human suffering as a technical problem, rather than a source of emotional distress. Your cot is positioned near a small window. That provides minimal light and no warmth, but offers a view of the monastery's central courtyard, where life continues with the same mechanical precision that governs all aspects of this community. From your prone position, you can see brothers moving between buildings on various errands, their brown habits creating moving shadows against the gray stone walls. The other patients in the infirmary represent a cross-section of monastic casualties. Brother Peter, the elderly scribe whose mind finally broke under years of copying pressure, lies in the cot beside yours, muttering continuously in a mixture of Latin and his native tongue. His eyes stare at something invisible to others, and his hands move constantly, as if he's still copying manuscripts that exist only in his damaged imagination. Across the hall, Brother David, a former farm worker, suffers from the lung disease. That claims many brothers who work outdoors in all weather conditions. His breathing is labored and wet, punctuated by coughing fits that spray blood onto the coarse blankets. He probably has weeks to live, though Brother Benedict makes no effort to predict or prevent his decline. Brother Marcus, who's screaming, Fitz disrupted copying work several weeks ago, occupies a corner cot where his intermittent episodes of violence can be contained with leather restraints. The copying work broke his mind as thoroughly as it broke your body, leaving him trapped in cycles of rage and terror that make normal interaction impossible. His fate serves as a warning about the psychological costs of monastic life that extend far beyond physical deterioration. Brother Benedict examines your condition with perfunctory attention, checking your pulse, examining your eyes, and testing your reflexes with the mechanical precision of someone following established procedures. His diagnosis is swift and certain, based on symptoms he's observed in dozens of former scribes over the years. Advanced scribes decline, he confirms, noting your trembling hands and unfocused gaze, caused by prolonged eye strain, repetitive motion injuries, and general exhaustion. Recovery is unlikely at this stage. The medical terminology disguises a simple reality. You've been systematically broken by working conditions that no human being can sustain, and there's no treatment that can restore what months of abuse have destroyed. The monastery's approach to occupational injuries is palliative rather than curative, focused on managing symptoms rather than addressing underlying causes. Your treatment consists of herbal teas that taste bitter and provide no noticeable benefit. Regular doses of poppy extract that dull pain while clouding consciousness. And the monastery's standard prescription for all ailments: prayer, fasting, and submission to divine will. The medical care reflects medieval understanding of illness as spiritual rather than physical phenomenon, treatable through religious devotion rather than practical intervention. The days in the infirmary blur together in a haze of pain, confusion, and gradual recognition that your monastic career has effectively ended. Your hands continue to tremble uncontrollably, making any form of precise work impossible. Your vision fluctuates between partial clarity and complete blackouts that last for increasingly long periods. Most concerning, your memory has become so unreliable that you sometimes forget basic information about your own identity, and history. Brother Benedict's rounds provide brief contact with someone who understands your condition, though his approach emphasizes acceptance rather than hope for improvement. Scribe's decline follows a predictable pattern, he explains with clinical detachment. First the hands fail, then the eyes, finally the mind. Some brothers adapt to other duties, but most simply waste away. The prognosis is both realistic and devastating. Your value to the monastery was based entirely on your ability to copy manuscripts with precision and speed. Without those capabilities, you become another mouth to feed in a community that operates on narrow margins of survival. The economic logic of monastic life doesn't include provisions for supporting disabled brothers indefinitely. What happens to scribes who can't recover? You ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. Brother Benedict's expression doesn't change. Some are reassigned to simple manual labor if their bodies can handle it. Others are transferred to monasteries that specialize in caring for incapacitated brothers. A few are encouraged to seek laicization and return to secular life. Each option represents a form of failure that contradicts the monastic promise of lifetime community membership. The reality is that brothers who become liabilities are quietly disposed of through mechanisms that preserve the institution while abandoning individuals who have sacrificed their health in its service. The infirmary's daily routine provides structure to days that would otherwise blend into undifferentiated suffering. Morning prayers are conducted by those patients capable of participation, though many are too weak or confused to follow the Latin responses. The single daily meal is delivered by novices who avoid eye contact and complete their duties with obvious haste to escape the atmosphere of decay. Brother Peter's condition continues to deteriorate as his mind retreats further from reality. His copying motions become more frantic and less coordinated, and his muttered conversations with invisible colleagues suggest that he's reliving traumatic episodes from his scribal career. Sometimes he screams about making errors that will result in punishment, jerking his arms as if trying to escape restraints that exist only in his damaged imagination. Brother David's lung disease progresses with mechanical inevitability, his breathing becoming more labored each day as fluid accumulates in his chest cavity. He faces death with the resigned acceptance that monastic life teaches, viewing his illness as divine will rather than the predictable result of working in harsh conditions without adequate protection or medical care. Your own decline follows the pattern that Brother Benedict described. The tremor in your hands worsens daily, spreading from fine motor control to gross motor functions that affect your ability to feed yourself or manage basic personal care. Your vision blackouts become longer and more frequent, sometimes lasting. Entire afternoons when consciousness simply disappears without warning. The psychological impact of helplessness adds another layer of suffering to the physical deterioration. After months of intensive intellectual work that demanded constant attention and precise execution, the enforced passivity of being an invalid creates its own form of torture. Your mind, when it functions clearly, has nothing to engage with except the progressive failure of your body's systems. One morning you wake to find Brother David's cot empty, the mattress stripped and waiting for the next casualty. His death during the night was quiet and unremarked, his body removed before dawn to avoid disrupting the infirmary's routine. No announcement is made, no special prayers offered. Individual deaths are absorbed into the community's rhythm with minimal disruption. Brother Peter's condition reaches a crisis point when his copying hallucinations become violent episodes that require physical restraint. His screams echo through the infirmary as he fights invisible punishments for errors that exist only in his broken mind. Brother Benedict doses him with enough poppy extract to induce unconsciousness, creating a temporary peace that probably hastens his final decline. Your own memory problems worsen to the point where you sometimes forget why you're in the infirmary or how long you've been there. Past and present blur together in confused narratives where copying work continues in dreams that feel more real than waking consciousness. The boundary between memory and hallucination dissolves as your damaged mind struggles to process experiences that overwhelmed normal cognitive function. The monastery's approach to terminal patients reflects its broader philosophy about individual worth and community survival. Resources are allocated based on potential for recovery rather than humanitarian concerns, and brothers whose conditions appear hopeless receive minimal attention beyond basic custodial care. The institution's priorities focus on maintaining productive capacity rather than caring for damaged members. Brother Benedict's evaluation of your progress is conducted with the same clinical detachment that marks all his patient interactions. No significant improvement, he notes after checking your reflexes and vision. Continued deterioration likely. Alternative arrangements should be considered. The euphemistic language disguises a recommendation that the monastery dispose of you through whatever mechanism causes least disruption to normal operations. Your usefulness has ended, and prolonged care represents an expense that the community can't justify given its ongoing financial pressures. The infirmary has become a warehouse for broken men whose service to the monastery exceeded their physical capacity to survive it. Each cot represents a different form of institutional failure disguised as individual weakness, and the accumulating casualties serve as evidence of a system that consumes people in service to preserving abstract ideals. The quiet efficiency with which broken brothers are processed through the infirmary and disposed of reveals the monastery's true priorities. The preservation of manuscripts matters more than the preservation of the men who create them, and institutional survival takes precedence over individual welfare. Your deteriorating condition is simply another administrative problem to be managed. With minimal disruption to normal operations as winter approaches and the infirmary grows colder, you realize that your monastic journey has reached its predictable conclusion. The contemplative life has contemplated you into something barely recognizable as human, and the salvation you sought has transformed into a form of damnation measured in damaged hands, failing sight and memories that slip away like water through. Broken Fingers. November arrives with bitter winds that penetrate the monastery's stone walls and transform the infirmary into an icebox, where breath creates visible clouds and blankets provide little protection against the cold that seeps into your bones. The reduced heating reflects the community's ongoing financial difficulties. Fuel costs must be balanced against manuscript revenue, and the comfort of invalids receives low priority in resource allocation decisions. Brother Peter dies during a particularly cold night, his breathing simply stopping without drama or final words. You wake to find his cot empty and stripped, his body removed before dawn to avoid disturbing the other patients. His death represents both release from suffering and confirmation that the infirmary serves primarily as a transitional space between usefulness and disposal. The empty cot remains unoccupied for less than a day before Brother Augustine, the bell ringer whose tuberculosis has progressed beyond treatment, takes Peter's place in the grim procession of broken monks. His 15 years of faithful service to the community earn him the same minimal care and inevitable outcome that await all brothers whose bodies fail under monastic demands. Your own condition continues its predictable decline. The tremor in your hands has spread throughout your nervous system, creating involuntary movements that make even basic functions like feeding yourself increasingly difficult. Your vision blackouts now last for hours at a time, leaving you trapped in darkness while consciousness continues to function. Most disturbingly, your memory has become so unreliable that you sometimes forget your own name or the circumstances that brought you to this place. Brother Benedict's medical examinations reveal what everyone already knows. You're dying by degrees. Your body shutting down non-essential systems in a desperate attempt to maintain basic life support. The process is irreversible and will continue until some vital function fails completely. The only question is how long you'll linger in this reduced state before biological systems finally collapse. Palliative care only, he notes in whatever records the monastery keeps of such matters. No reasonable expectation of recovery or return to productive duties. The medical terminology disguises a death sentence pronounced with bureaucratic efficiency. You've been reclassified from productive asset to disposal problem, and the monastery's limited resources will be directed toward maintaining brothers who still have Potential value to the community that the infirmary's population fluctuates as winter. Weather exacerbates existing health problems throughout the monastery. Brother Marcus, whose copying work induced violent madness, dies during one of his restraint episodes, apparently from heart failure brought on by his frantic struggles against leather bonds. Brother Augustine follows him within a week, his tubercular lungs finally surrendering to the combination of disease and cold. Each death removes another witness to the human cost of monastic idealism, and the survivors quickly forget names and faces of brothers whose service ended in the infirmary's anonymous suffering. The institutional memory focuses on preserved manuscripts rather than destroyed men, and the monastery's history will record artistic achievements while omitting the casualties required to achieve them. Your days blur together in cycles of pain, confusion, and gradual recognition that consciousness itself is becoming unreliable. You find yourself slipping in and out of awareness without warning, sometimes returning to lucidity hours later with no memory of the intervening time. The boundary between waking and sleeping dissolves as your damaged brain struggles to maintain normal cognitive function. During brief periods of clarity, you contemplate the journey that brought you to this ending. The spiritual aspirations that originally drew you to monastic life seem like memories from someone else's experience, distant and irrelevant to your current reality. The promise of finding meaning through contemplation and service has been replaced by the simple biological imperative of surviving one more day. The monastery's daily routine continues around the infirmary with mechanical precision, marked by bells that call the community to prayer and work. Through your small window, you can see brothers moving between buildings on various duties, their faces showing the familiar combination of exhaustion and resignation that marks all aspects of monastic life. The scriptorium operates without you, its copying work redistributed among scribes who haven't yet reached the breaking point. New novices arrive periodically to replace brothers who have died or been disposed of through various mechanisms. The institutional machine continues functioning regardless of individual casualties, processing fresh volunteers into the system. That will eventually consume them as it consumed you. Brother Benedict makes his rounds with decreasing frequency, his attention focused on patients who might still recover enough to resume useful work. Your condition has progressed beyond the point where medical intervention offers any hope of improvement, and his limited resources are better invested in brothers whose decline hasn't reached terminal stages. Comfortable as possible, he murmurs during one of his brief examinations, adjusting your poppy extract dosage to manage pain while acknowledging that comfort is a relative concept for someone whose nervous system is systematically failing. Herbal medicines and tinctures that once represented hope for recovery have become simply tools for managing the dying process. There's no pretense that your condition might improve, no discussion of returning to productive duties. You've entered the final phase of institutional disposal, where the only remaining question is how long the process will take. Winter deepens around the monastery, bringing shorter days and longer nights that blur together in the infirmary's perpetual twilight. The cold penetrates your thin blankets and settles into joints that no longer move properly, creating new forms of pain to add to the existing catalog of physical discomfort. Food becomes increasingly irrelevant as your digestive system joins the other bodily functions that are shutting down. The thin gruel and stale bread that constitute invalid rations provide minimal nutrition and less satisfaction. But eating requires energy that you no longer possess in sufficient quantities to make the effort worthwhile. Your world contracts to the immediate area around your cot, the rough wool blanket that provides inadequate warmth, the straw mattress that has molded itself to your increasingly skeletal frame, the stone walls that will outlast you by centuries. Everything beyond this small space becomes theoretical, existing only in memories that grow less reliable with each passing day. The other patients in the infirmary represent various stages of the same decline that's claiming you. Brother Augustine's coughing fits grow weaker as his strength fails. Brother Marcus's violent episodes become less frequent as his body conserves energy for basic survival. And new arrivals take the places of those who die with depressing regularity. 1. Morning, you wake to find that you can't see at all. Not the intermittent blackouts that have been affecting your vision for weeks, but complete and apparently permanent blindness. The world has reduced to sounds, smells, and the tactile sensations of your failing body. Brother Benedict's examination confirms what you already suspect. The damage to your nervous system has progressed to include your optic nerves. Vision loss is common in advanced cases, he explains with clinical detachment. The copying work damages the eyes directly, but systemic deterioration affects all sensory functions eventually. The blindness adds another layer of isolation to your condition, cutting off visual connection to the world beyond your cot. You become completely dependent on others for basic needs like food and waste elimination, though the monastery's approach to invalid care emphasizes minimal intervention rather than comprehensive assistance. The sounds of monastic life continue around you with the same mechanical precision that has governed your entire experience in this community. Bells mark the canonical hours, footsteps echo in corridors as brothers move between duties, and the distant sounds of copying work remind you of the activity that destroyed your health and purpose. Your memories of the outside world, the life you lived before entering the monastery, fade like smoke and wind. The details of your previous existence become increasingly unclear as your damaged brain struggles to maintain even basic cognitive function. You're becoming unmoored from personal history, drifting toward a state where only immediate physical sensations provide any connection to reality. Brother Benedict's visits become perfunctory checks to confirm that you're still alive, rather than serious medical examinations. Your condition has progressed beyond the point where treatment offers any possibility of improvement, and his limited time is better spent on patients who might still recover enough to resume useful work. Declining rapidly, you hear him note to someone, probably a novice learning the grim realities of infirmary management. Days rather than weeks, most likely. The clinical assessment of your remaining lifespan creates a strange sense of relief. The uncertainty about your fate is being replaced by the certainty of approaching death, and there's comfort in knowing that the suffering will end relatively soon. You've moved beyond hope for recovery into acceptance of inevitable conclusion. Monastery's approach to dying brothers reflects its broader philosophy about individual worth and institutional priorities. Resources aren't wasted on elaborate deathbed ceremonies or extensive spiritual preparation. Dying is simply another biological process to be managed efficiently while minimizing disruption to normal operations. Your last coherent memories involve the sound of quills scratching against parchment, the smell of ink and vellum, and the constant pressure to maintain impossible standards under conditions that no human being should be expected to endure. These sensory fragments represent the essence of your monastic experience, not spiritual enlightenment or meaningful service, but systematic destruction disguised as holy purpose. The preservation of medieval learning required human sacrifice on a scale that history rarely acknowledges, and your anonymous death in a monastery infirmary represents just one casualty in an institutional system that consumed people in service to preserving abstract knowledge. Every beautiful illuminated manuscript cost months or years of a scribe's life. Every completed book represented irreversible damage to the man who copied it. As consciousness fades and the physical world recedes into irrelevance, your final understanding involves the recognition that you've been part of something larger and more terrible than individual suffering. The monastery represents a machine for converting human lives into preserved knowledge, and your destruction was simply the predictable cost of operating such a system. The contemplative life contemplated you into something barely recognizable as human, and the salvation you sought became a form of damnation measured in damaged hands, failed sight, and memories that dissolved like salt in water. But the manuscripts will survive while their creators are forgotten, and future generations will treasure the beauty of illuminated books without knowing the price paid for their preservation. Death comes gradually rather than dramatically. Consciousness, fading like a candle guttering in wind until awareness simply stops without ceremony or final revelation. Your body, systematically broken by months of impossible demands, finally surrenders to the accumulated damage that no amount of spiritual discipline could overcome. The official cause will be recorded as pneumonia complicated by malnutrition, but the real cause was institutional brutality disguised as religious devotion. Brother, Benedict discovers your death during his morning rounds, checking for the vital signs that are no longer present. Your body has the skeletal appearance that marks all terminal cases in the infirmary, flesh consumed by inadequate nutrition and excessive work demands until only the essential framework remains. Death has come as release rather than tragedy, ending suffering that had exceeded the limits of human endurance. Your cot is stripped and prepared for the next casualty before the morning prayer service ends. The monastery's approach to death emphasizes efficient processing rather than elaborate mourning, and individual losses are absorbed into institutional routine with minimal disruption to normal operations. By evening, another broken brother will occupy your space in the grim procession of monastic casualties. The brief funeral service conducted in the monastery church includes prayers for your soul, an acknowledgement of your service to the community, but no mention of the circumstances that caused your death or the institutional failures that created those circumstances. The official narrative focuses on spiritual achievement rather than human cost, preserving the monastery's reputation while obscuring the reality of systematic abuse. Your grave in the monastery cemetery joins dozens of others that mark brothers who died in service to preserving medieval learning. The simple wooden cross bears only your religious name and dates of birth and death, with no indication of the specialized skills that made you valuable to the community or the working conditions that destroyed your health. Future visitors will see evidence of dedicated religious service rather than occupational casualties. The manuscripts you copied during your abbreviated monastic career will survive for centuries, treasured by collectors and scholars who appreciate their artistic beauty and historical significance. The psalter that cost you 18 hours of continuous work will be preserved in a wealthy patron's library. The prayer book that broke your hands will serve future generations of devout readers, and the canonical law treatise that damaged your eyes will influence legal scholarship for decades to come. But your name won't appear in any of these books. Medieval scribes worked anonymously, their individual contributions subsumed into institutional achievement that credited communities rather than individuals. The human cost of manuscript preservation remains hidden behind beautiful illumination and elegant script that reveal nothing about the suffering required to create them. The scriptorium continues operating without interruption, Brother Joachim, redistributing your unfinished assignments among scribes who haven't yet reached their breaking points. New novices arrive periodically to replace brothers who have died or been disposed of through various mechanisms, and the system continues processing fresh volunteers into copying work that will eventually consume them as it consumed you. Brother Luke, whose vision problems followed the same pattern as yours, takes your place among the terminal cases in the infirmary. His decline accelerates during the winter months, following the predictable progression from useful scribe to disabled invalid to anonymous corpse. His death, when it comes, will receive the same perfunctory processing that marked your own transition. From life to institutional memory, the monastery's population remains relatively stable despite the constant attrition among scribes and other workers. Young men continue volunteering for monastic life, drawn by promises of spiritual fulfillment and meaningful service that disguise the reality of systematic exploitation. The institutional machine continues functioning regardless of individual casualties, sustained by fresh recruits who don't yet understand the true cost of their commitment. Years pass with mechanical regularity as the monastery continues its mission of preserving and transmitting medieval learning. Manuscripts are copied, illuminated, and distributed to wealthy patrons throughout Europe. The scriptorium maintains its reputation for producing high-quality work that meets the exacting standards demanded by ecclesiastical and secular customers. But the human cost accumulates in the monastery cemetery, where wooden crosses mark brothers who died in service to ideals that consumed their creators. Each grave represents not just an individual tragedy, but evidence of an institutional system that valued preserved knowledge more than the lives of those who preserved it. The beautiful manuscripts that justify the monastery's existence continue appearing in libraries and collections throughout the medieval world. Scholars praise their artistic excellence, historians treasure their textual accuracy, and collectors pay enormous sums for examples of monastic craftsmanship. The books become cultural artifacts that represent the highest achievements of medieval civilization. Yet none of these manuscripts reveal the stories of the men who created them, the scribes who worked until their hands bled and their eyes failed, the illuminators who bent over copying desks until their spines curved permanently, the brothers who sacrificed their health and lives to preserve knowledge for future generations. The institutional narrative emphasizes spiritual achievement, while obscuring the human cost that made such achievement possible. Your death represents just one casualty in a system that operated throughout medieval Europe, converting human lives into preserved learning through methods that would be recognized as industrial abuse in any other context. Thousands of anonymous scribes died in monasteries across the continent, their lives consumed by copying work that sustained the transmission of classical and religious knowledge through the Dark Ages. The monastery's official history, when it's eventually written, will emphasize the community's scholarly achievements and spiritual dedication while omitting mention of the working conditions that made such achievements possible. The institutional memory focuses on manuscripts produced, rather than men destroyed, preserving a narrative of noble service while concealing the reality of systematic exploitation. Future historians studying medieval monasticism will find extensive records of manuscript production, the minimal documentation of the human cost involved in such production. The beautiful illuminated books that survive in modern museums and libraries represent not just artistic achievement, but evidence of institutional brutality that history has chosen to forget. Your anonymous contribution to preserving medieval learning joins thousands of other forgotten sacrifices that sustained European civilization through its darkest periods. The knowledge you helped preserve would eventually fuel the Renaissance, inform the Reformation, and provide the foundation for modern scholarship. But the price paid for such preservation, measured in broken bodies and destroyed lives, remains hidden behind romantic narratives about peaceful monasteries and dedicated monks. The contemplative life that attracted you with promises of spiritual fulfillment and meaningful service revealed itself as an institutional machine designed to extract maximum productivity from human resources while providing minimal support for the people providing that productivity. Your death represents the predictable outcome of a system that valued abstract ideals more than concrete human welfare. As winter storms rage around the monastery and fresh snow covers your unmarked grave, the copying work continues in the scriptorium, or new scribes struggle with manuscripts that will eventually break them as they broke you. The institutional machine processes another generation of volunteers through the same brutal cycle that claims most participants within a few years of beginning intensive copying work. The monastery endures while its individual members are consumed, sustained by the constant arrival of fresh recruits who haven't yet learned the true cost of their commitment. The preservation of medieval learning requires human sacrifice on a scale that few people outside monastic communities ever understand. And that sacrifice continues with mechanical efficiency that transforms individual tragedies into statistical inevitabilities. Your story ends in the anonymous darkness of a monastery cemetery, but the system that destroyed you continues operating with the same brutal efficiency that marked all aspects of your experience. The beautiful manuscripts you helped create will outlast you by centuries, treasured as evidence of medieval achievement while the human cost of their creation fades into historical obscurity. Centuries pass, and the monastery of St. Bartholomew fades into historical obscurity, its buildings crumbling into ruins that attract occasional archaeological interest but little public attention. The institution that consumed your life and thousands of others, like it becomes a footnote in scholarly works about medieval monasticism, remembered more for its manuscript production than for the human cost of such production. The Psalter you completed during that brutal 18-hour copying session survives in the private collection of a wealthy family who treasure it as an example of medieval artistic achievement. Museum visitors who see it displayed occasionally comment on the beauty of its illumination and the skill required to create such intricate work, but none suspect the suffering that its creation required. Brother Francis's prayer book, finished by your trembling hands during the final weeks of your copying career, serves a parish church in a remote village where parishioners use it for daily devotions. The irregular handwriting in its later sections tells the story of declining physical capability, but casual readers attribute the variations to different scribes rather than the progressive breakdown of a single copyist working beyond human limits. The canonical law treatise that damaged your eyesight influences legal scholarship for generations. Its precise copying of complex Latin texts providing authoritative reference material for church courts throughout Europe. Legal scholars who consult it praise the accuracy of its transcription without considering the human cost of achieving such precision under impossible working conditions. Modern historians studying medieval monasticism focus on the intellectual and spiritual achievements of monastic communities, while largely ignoring the working conditions that made such achievements possible. The narrative of peaceful monks preserving civilization through dark ages conceals the reality of institutional systems that systematically exploited and destroyed the people who sustained them. Archaeological excavations at monastery sites occasionally uncover evidence of the human cost of monastic life. Skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition, repetitive stress injuries, and premature death that contradict romantic notions about medieval religious communities. But such findings receive less attention than discoveries of illuminated manuscripts or architectural features that support more appealing historical narratives. The manuscripts you copied are now valued in millions of dollars. They're economic, worth calculated according to rarity, artistic quality, and historical significance. None of these valuations include consideration of the human cost involved in their creation or the institutional brutality that made their preservation possible. They're treated as cultural artifacts rather than evidence of systematic abuse, disguised as religious devotion. Museum exhibitions featuring medieval manuscripts emphasize their beauty and importance to European intellectual development while omitting discussion of the working conditions in scriptoriums or the health problems that affected most scribes. The educational materials that accompany such exhibitions perpetuate romantic myths about monastic life while concealing realities that would disturb modern sensibilities. Academic conferences on medieval studies include sessions on manuscript, production techniques, paleography, and artistic influences that shaped illuminated books, but rarely address the occupational hazards faced by scribes or the institutional systems that treated human beings as disposable resources. The scholarly focus remains on cultural products rather than the people who produce them. Your anonymous sacrifice joins thousands of others that sustained the transmission of classical and religious knowledge through medieval Europe. But these sacrifices remain largely invisible to modern audiences who benefit from preserved learning without understanding its cost. The beautiful books that grace modern libraries and museums represent not just intellectual achievement, but evidence of human exploitation on an industrial scale. The monastery system that destroyed you operated throughout medieval Europe, processing countless volunteers through copying work that broke most participants within a few years of beginning. Intensive manuscript production. Each community developed its own variations on the basic theme of extracting maximum productivity from human resources while providing minimal support for the people providing that productivity. The institutional logic that justified such exploitation. The preservation of knowledge for future generations sounds noble in historical accounts, but loses its appeal when examined in light of the human cost involved. The question of whether preserving classical texts justifies systematic brutality toward the people who preserved them remains unanswered by historians who prefer to focus on cultural achievements rather than human casualties. Your death represents one statistical point in mortality data that medieval monasteries carefully concealed from potential recruits and outside observers. The official records emphasize spiritual achievements, while omitting mention of working conditions that would be illegal under modern labor laws and considered criminal abuse in contemporary contexts. The survival of medieval learning depended on institutional systems that modern society would recognize as fundamentally exploitative. But historical distance allows scholars to focus on beneficial outcomes while ignoring the methods used to achieve them. The preservation of civilization required human sacrifice that few people today would consider acceptable. Regardless of the cultural benefits involved, as your unmarked grave disappears beneath centuries of accumulated earth and vegetation. The manuscripts you helped create continue serving their intended purposes, preserving knowledge, inspiring devotion, and demonstrating the artistic capabilities of medieval craftsmen. But the human story behind their creation remains hidden beneath institutional narratives that emphasize achievement while concealing cost. The contemplative life that promised spiritual fulfillment and meaningful service revealed itself as a machine for converting human lives into cultural products, and your experience represents just one example of how institutional idealism can disguise systematic brutality. The gap between monastic rhetoric and monastic reality created psychological tensions that destroyed men's minds as effectively as the working conditions destroyed their bodies. Your legacy lives not in any monument or memorial, but in the manuscripts that bear silent witness to the human cost of preserving civilization through dark ages. Every carefully copied letter represents a small victory against the forces of decay and ignorance, purchased with blood, sweat, and lives that history has largely forgotten. The monastery of St. Bartholomew finally closes in the 16th century, its population depleted by disease, its buildings crumbling from neglect, its mission superseded by printing technology that makes hand-copied manuscripts economically obsolete. The last few brothers are transferred to other communities or allowed to live out their final years in secular retirement. The ruins are eventually purchased by a local nobleman who uses the stones to build more practical structures, erasing most physical evidence of the institution that consumed so many lives in service to preserving medieval learning. Only the cemetery remains, its wooden crosses long since rotted away, leaving no visible trace of the men who died in service to ideals that outlasted their creators. But the manuscripts survive, scattered across libraries and collections throughout the world, carrying forward the knowledge that justified the suffering required to preserve it. Your anonymous contribution to human learning continues benefiting scholars and students who will never know the price paid for the books that informed their research and education. In the end, your sacrifice achieved its intended purpose, the preservation of knowledge for future generations, but at a cost that history prefers to forget. The beautiful illuminated manuscripts that grace modern museums represent both the highest achievements of medieval culture and evidence of institutional systems that systematically destroyed the people who sustained them. The contemplative life contemplated you into something barely recognizable as human, but it also preserved the intellectual foundation that would eventually support the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the development of modern scholarship. Your death was both meaningless individual tragedy and essential contribution to cultural continuity that spans centuries. Welcome to the legacy of broken souls, where beauty emerges from suffering and knowledge is preserved through the systematic sacrifice of those who guard it. The manuscripts endure while their creators fade into anonymity, but the cost of preservation remains embedded in every carefully copied line and every precisely executed illumination. Your story ends not with redemption or vindication, but with the quiet recognition that civilization's greatest achievements often require human sacrifice that history chooses to forget. The beautiful books you help to create will inspire and educate future generations, but the human cost of their preservation remains hidden beneath romantic narratives that value cultural products more than the people who produce them.